Hello, and welcome. I am Chilling Tales. And as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. My mother used to say there are two kinds of underground: the kind people make because they're proud of themselves, and the kind the ground makes because it's tired of us. She learned that from her grandmother, who cleaned the crypt steps under St. Isidore's, where the candles sweat into the stone, and the air remembers names better than people do. Down there we speak soft, my mother would tell me, and we put things back where we found them. Down there we never ring bells we didn't hang. It was a bedtime warning wrapped in folklore, something about the undertaker of Halcyon, Brierly's old name, a man who loved his ledger so much that he began adding the living to it, keeping their shoes in pairs to count how many feet a household owed the dark. I didn't think about any of that when my car battery died in the municipal lot, and I decided to cut across the abandoned rail yard. I was thinking about the 40-page zoning addendum waiting on my desk, a vending machine sandwich that tasted like its own wrapper, and the way grief turns every errand into a series of doors you forgot you had to open. Mostly, I was thinking about time. The long way around would add half an hour to an evening already too long, and the chain-link fence at the lot's edge sagged where everyone always pretended not to crawl under. I ducked, stepped into weeds glittering with broken glass, and told myself that if I slipped a boot between the old rails and followed them through the low cut under the hill, I would meet the main road in minutes. The smell hit first: rust, wet creosote, a sweetness like a storage room opened after too many summers. Crickets chirped with the thin confidence of things not paid enough to sing properly. The moon made the rails look almost cared for. Beyond the yard, the hill's dark shoulder rose. A culvert should have been there, one of the shoulder-height concrete pipes the city capped when teenagers turned them into drainage graffiti museums. Instead, there was a mouth. It wasn't a culvert, it wasn't even honest masonry. The entrance leaned into the hill as if the hill had learned how to smile too wide. The arch was ringed with black streaks that didn't look like soot so much as the residue of something that had licked the stone clean and left the taste behind. I hesitated while the old stories stepped out of the past, like relatives who can't be ignored. Shoes in pairs at the foot of beds, bells that hum when you aren't listening, the undertaker's ledger, too heavy to keep upstairs. Two kinds of underground, I heard my mother say, but the shortcut felt like a promise I'd already agreed to, and so I went in. The temperature drop was immediate and complete, a hand over a candle. My ears popped, sound gathered in the tunnel, and began to behave like it had rules of its own. Gravel muttered under my boots. I raised my phone, and the flashlight pushed 10 feet of honesty into a dark that seemed comfortable without it. On the wall, graffiti glared back, faces, eyes, a sentence scratched until the stone itself looked scabbed. Mold climbed in strange anatomies, long fingers, arched spines, something like antlers. A cricket behind me chirped once, apologized in silence, and left the conversation. Somewhere ahead, something scraped the stone with a deliberation rats don't have. I turned to leave. The mouth was gone, not turned, not hidden, gone. Where there had been an arch there was wall, unhelpfully solid under my splayed fingers. The rails behind me seemed to sink into the rock like bad memory. I aimed my beam at blank stone until I could taste my own panic. Okay, I said to whatever counts as mercy underground. Okay, forward then. The tunnel sloped like a decision people make for you. Shallow recesses showed in the walls, the first two the size of closets, the next deep enough to be rooms that had changed their minds. In one recess lay a porcelain doll with a crack like lightning from mouth to ear. In another, a miner's helmet with its carbide lamp, pried off, a mildew-green ring where sweat had been, and then the shoes appeared. Pairs, men's steel toes, women's pumps with their tips worn spare, children's sneakers that once would have lit at every step, all set toe-to-toe with a care so precise, the care itself was a cruelty. I thought of my brother lining his sockets on the rail, smallest to largest, so that morning wouldn't punish him for what night forgot. I thought of the undertaker's ledger making a house heavy. The scrape returned, closer, then paused, listening. The air changed taste. Antiseptic long used, paper stored improperly, wet fur. I moved the light, and the beam felt thinner, as if the dark were a dense thing, and not a lack. The alcoves leaned toward me. I remembered my mother's trick for halls that think they own you. Name where you are. Briarly, I said softly. Rail yard. Municipal lot. The words fell and became nothing more than sounds a mouth had made. The tunnel widened into a room that wasn't a room because no one had been brave enough to call it one. Rails split in three. The center line ducked into a pool, so black it looked painted. The right-hand line lifted into a platform tiled with old ambition, its safety stripe a ghost of caution. On the wall above, letters that damp had rewritten, spelled Halcyon, the name Briarly used to wear when it still believed in civic miracles. I climbed because elevation makes cowards honest. Benches stood where backs had hated them and learned to be grateful. On one sat a single shoe. Its mate lay on the tile, toe touching toe. They were cleaner than anything else down here. A doorway gaped into what had been an office in an era when offices were still polite. A desk, a chair angled like a person had stood up expecting to sit again. A lamp, sedimentary layers of paper. A map hung on the far wall. Glass cracked across continents, color faded to funeral china. It showed a city like ours, and not like ours, pierced with lines and oxblood, mustard, and an untrustworthy blue. Halcyon Subterranean Passage Authority, the legend said, and in the corner someone had penciled notes. Soil types, water table, bedrock. One word underlined 3 times, voids. Something shifted across the doorway behind me. I turned with the slow economy of a person who knows the difference between moving and running. The beam found a shape in the cutout across the platform. It wasn't theatrical. Nightmare drawings do too much. This was precise in the way moss is precise when it decides to be architecture. A back made of ropes under wet canvas, ridges like bones that had reluctantly agreed to be bones. Front limbs bent the wrong way for any elbow that wanted to last. Ends that were not hands but had learned the motions hands do. A head that rose carefully like the neck had only just been invented. When the mouth opened, it wasn't for threat. It was as if it were trying out the fit of a word and finding the measure wanting. As for eyes, if you need them, call the 2 deep panels of reflection eyes. But understand, you have already begun to lie to yourself. It moved not toward me, but along the bench line, 3 measures to the single shoe, a tremble from limb to end to shoe, a tilt that corrected what I had been too scared to fix. Toe found toe. Okay now. It withdrew as if embarrassed by the demonstration. A sound came from its chest that was not a hiss and not a purr. It was the breath people make when they look at a baby and try not to startle it. Then it unmade its edges. It's the only way to say it. It didn't leap or duck. It let go of its outline, and the space it had been learned how to be empty again. In the office, the map looked like it had remembered a name it didn't want to know. On the desk, a folder with a spine, softened by fingers, waited the way a wrong book waits to be opened. I opened it. Black and white photographs frowned up at me in the flat old way. Men in hats around a trench that wasn't a trench but a cut into something that didn't want to be called Earth. Another image showed a bell the height of a knee rising on chains from a place that did not admit directions. Its surface looked slick even without a shine. Notes in tidy script, acoustic anomalies during lift, recommend suspension. A second hand had added in pencil, do not ring. A soft, wet scrubbing reached my ears. I followed it down a corridor, narrower than honesty, stenciled numbers sweating from the paint. Someone had scratched Helpay at knee height, and someone else had written under it, don't answer, and the two hands had been patient with each other. The hall opened into a chamber whose walls had been licked into curves. In the center, an arrangement waited, shoes in pairs nested in rings, laces tucked into their throats, helmets at measured intervals as if guarding, lunch pails with their handles threaded as if holding hands. In the very middle, 9 copper bells no bigger than a palm, their bellies stamped with fish whose eyes convinced you and then didn't, if you kept looking. 2 creatures stood by the bells. The larger held itself between the arrangement and the door, with the posture of a person who knows the exit and will use it on your behalf if you behave. The smaller leaned in, an end laid lightly over the bells, as if a parent's hand were on a fever. The bells hummed, not from a strike, but from being named by contact. The note gathered in my jaw and went down my spine like a memory I didn't earn. A seam opened in the wall behind them. That's what it was. Skin admitting a line. It had been hiding. A figure leaned within it, half in, half out. Green municipal jacket, hair flattened by the habit of not wanting to take up space. Eyes open with the floating focus of someone almost out of anesthesia. Eddie, I said, not because I recognized him from the missing poster stapled to the bulletin board at work, though I did, but because the name belonged to the angle of his head. He blinked, and the blink took longer than blink should. Tell my mother I had my shoes on, he said. He gave me the sort of smile men keep for when they can't afford to frighten anyone. Come out, I said, because telling people to do impossible things is how we prove we care. The seam tightened to the width of a hand and paused like a polite throat. The larger creature shifted half a degree, ridges along its back rising in a slow wave. The smaller pressed the bells gently. They answered with a note so low it made me aware of bones I'd never properly considered. I backed away to the platform and didn't run, because running is how you teach certain hungers your shape. The pool under the center rail broke one bubble like a perfect eye, and then remembered water. In the alcoves, the doll rolled a quarter-inch as if settling in. When the wall finally gave way to night, it did so with the weary indifference of a clerk stamping a form. I sat on the curb with my knees apart and my hands dangling like nobody's business, and watched the fence remember its plain duty. Across the lot, the municipal complex glowed with that odd faith buildings have in the business conducted inside them. A bar down the block emptied a handful of laughter into the street. I wanted to call my mother. I wanted her to tell me not to be a fool, and to be a fool anyway. Instead, I went home, put my shoes side by side under the chair the way she taught me, and slept badly while the radiator translated for ghosts. I didn't go back the next day. The tunnel mouth was gone again, Hill shrugging its coat closed, and I felt both hurt and forgiven. On the third day, I found it waiting at lunchtime, a clean black line drawn on the hill where nobody had sharpened a pencil. I brought rope because my brother believed in rope, a pen light because men like to pretend we have enough light, and a length of brass pipe from my trunk because I had decided names were weapons. Inside, the office map had grown another crack north along the oxblood line, as if someone had taken a dull pencil to the plaster underneath. The single shoe on the bench had migrated an inch to nuzzle its mate more neatly. The chamber with the bells smelled like antiseptic, turned friendly by long use. The seam stayed shut. The larger creature waited the way dogs wait outside bathrooms. The smaller rested its end on the bells like an oath. I can trade, I said, my voice absurdly formal in that room. Air for a name for a way. The larger unrolled a length of hose and set a glass bottle on the tile. It was the rude, beautiful kind used on the old condensate traps downstairs. Warm, the brass cap turned under its own intent. Inside, air had a shape, a small motion, a curl that looked like it wanted out without knowing why. I lifted it to my ear. A woman's voice looped inside, singing a word the way you sing a child to sleep. Not English. Then it pivoted and I recognized the syllables. Delilah, Catherine from Custodial, is not a woman you make cry, but she cried when I said the name in her ear in the doorway of the janitorial office, because she had listened to Eddie's mother talk to every photograph she owned and could not stand the way a woman's name can get misremembered by a city that writes it wrong in a field on a form. We walked to Delilah's apartment with the bottle in my pocket like contraband and said her name in the right shape of breath, and she put her hand over her mouth, and then over my hand, and then over Catherine's shoulder, and when she had cried the part that needed to be cried, she gave us cookies, because she's the kind of woman who will feed whoever brings her a piece of her own life. That night the seam was open enough for a man to step through if he had decided that patience was the better part of bravery. Eddie's hand appeared first. Catherine took it like an oath. The wall gave him up as if reluctant to admit generosity. He stepped onto our side with his shoes on, laces tucked neatly in a way that made me want to laugh until I slept. Tell her I wore them, he said again, and when he smiled this time there was less of apology in it and more of a hush. You would think that would be the end of the kind of story men like to buy me drinks to ask me to tell. It wasn't. The trades continued, not nightly but like weather systems that roll through when pressure changes. A bottle left at the threshold, a laugh or a nickname or a word breathed into it like a bird rescued from a chimney and returned to sky. A small change in the building as payment. Elevators that stop overshooting by one floor, a radiator that learns English again, the courthouse lobby doors that decide not to hum at 2 in the morning. The city noticed the wrong thing, as it always does. Fresh air usage is high, a consultant said, as if that were a moral failing. They capped the roof relief to optimize flows with a white paper that read like a prayer to prophet. By midnight, the building's breath had thickened to the pitch of a song I did not want to hear. The lobby's columns gathered their corners into throats. The glass in the fixtures sang one long, deliberate note like a tuning fork, deciding to be. I went up in rain and spun the relief wheel until the hinge screamed, and the wind pushed my hat to the parapet and returned it like a guilty friend. The air loosened. The lights remembered they were only lights. In the morning there was a slate mortared into the seam, where the brickwork never quite consents to stay. Do not ring, scratched with a nail, and beneath it, in a smaller hand, keep the air. I wish I could tell you I never heard the bells ring. One night, when summer had pried open every window in the city and wouldn't close them, the bells made a sound that wasn't a sound. It moved through my jaw and folded the bones behind my ears like paper. The smaller creature flinched. The larger set its weight, as if to receive an impact I could not see. The seam pulsed. A deep, slow answer came from somewhere farther down, like a building turning over in sleep. Don't, I said, not as a command, as a plea. The note unwound the way stitches give. The bells sat quietly, as if offended by their own temptation. That should have been the last time I saw temper in that room. But hunger and order are cousins that fight like brothers in a backyard. The next Tuesday, the municipal complex's power glitched, and the elevators forgot which direction mattered. I followed a ribbon of LED light down to the sump, where the room had been wearing a mouth all week. The shoes at the threshold were polished like a rebuke. Inside, the smaller creature had curled around the bells and would not move when the larger leaned. The bottle on the tile was hot, almost to pain. I unscrewed the cap with my shirt hem over my palm. Nothing came out. No voice, no laugh, no word, just a quiet the size of a chapel. I carried it up and held it under the relief vent anyway. The quiet slid out and went up, and the building exhaled like a parent who has stopped listening for a cough and started listening for sleep. I stood there, my throat hurting with nothing, and realized what I was, a courier of air between a creature that arranges what we drop and a building that pays attention too hard. I was not a hero. I was maintenance. That knowledge would have been enough to keep me obedient if the Undertaker of Halcyon hadn't decided to count me in small ways. The first morning I woke with my boots side by side under the chair, toes touching, laces tucked in. I blamed myself for being neat in my sleep. The second morning, I woke to find my coffee mugs paired on the counter handles, meeting like hands, and I set them apart and laughed to hear myself apologize out loud. The third morning, there was a third coin between two coins I had left unpaired out of spite, a thin copper piece stamped with a fish where a president should have been. I carried it to the fence at the yard and slid it under to the place where weeds grow shortest, and when I looked back from the sidewalk, I could see a bare patch that looked like a hand had been resting there, waiting to accept what I offered. You want a climax, you want blood, or you want the moment when I lose the rest of my life to someone else's story. I can give you the moment I almost rang the bells. The city awarded a contract to a new startup to automate the air, and their app turned the relief vent into a number on a screen someone miles away could flick as if they were dimming a lamp in their living room. The night they tested it, the doors bowed, the columns made throats again, and the building's breath gathered into a single hard-held note. Down in the chamber, the smaller creature pressed its limb to the bells and froze like a child, keeping a promise with all their might. The larger rolled the seam back with its body and took one careful step into the door, like a father choosing to stand between a road and a curious son. I reached for the bells not because I wanted to call anything, but because a part of me had learned wrong, that ringing is action and silence is surrender. My fingers hovered an inch above copper that should have been cold and wasn't. I felt the Undertaker's ledger open to a page with my house on it. I felt the room consider how my name would look stacked above my brother's. I let my hand down and unlaced my boots instead. It sounds foolish to say this, I unpaired things. I set one bell a half-inch off the neat 9. I turned one helmet askew. I crooked the laces on one pair of shoes and left the loops long like tongues. I took 2 lunch pails from the ring of hands and set them apart with their handles not touching. The room breathed in offended and then out, considering I said soft and stupid as a ritual. Not like that. The bells stilled, the pressure in my skull eased by one thread. The larger looked at me, not with eyes but with the attention of something that knows how to survive, then repositioned one bell back into the 9, as if to say, I accept your refusal, but do not embarrass me. I opened the vent on the roof with both hands until the rain ran down my sleeves like absolution. If there is an ending, it is this. The hill still learns and unlearns a mouth. Shoes still wait at thresholds with their laces tucked, and I still set them apart when I have to. Bottles still warm my palm and empty into sky. The slate still says do not ring, and the smaller hand beneath it still says keep the air. The map in the office shows new cracks sometimes along lines no one will fund. Catherine still walks the halls like a woman whose job is to clean Mercy off tile and put it back on. Mornings, Victor still tells me there is no tunnel, only a culvert that has seen too many teenagers. Delilah sometimes brings me cookies, the kind with the crosshatch of a fork on top, because that's how she was taught to say thank you to men who do what they can and know better than to do what they can't. Sometimes, when I wake at 3 and the radiator is practicing a language I cannot speak, the room shifts around me as if furniture has tides. I put my bare feet on the floor and feel the building's breath come up through it like a dog pressing its head into your hand. I let it be. I put things back where I found them. I leave a coin when I pass the fence, because you have to pay the undertaker something, or he will come upstairs to collect, and upstairs is not where he knows how to behave. On work days, I walk through the lobby and say out loud and under my breath, "Not here," when the doors think about bowing, and they straighten themselves out like a shirt tugged by a friend. And on certain nights when summer won't quit, and the courthouse lights keep their glassy watch, and the hill thinks about smiling, I stand at the edge of the yard and smell paper and antiseptic and fur, and I feel the invisible rings under the water open and close, once like a throat, swallowing a name, and I say my own under my breath, each syllable in order, so that when the ledger opens, the line for me remains mine to write. I won't tell you it's noble. It isn't. It's work, keeping air moving, unpairing what shouldn't be paired, pairing what must be, carrying a bottle to a vent, because the ground below us built a room out of our leftovers and needs us to keep its manners. You can make a religion out of anything you do, often enough at midnight. I have this. I don't ring bells. I didn't hang. I don't answer what I didn't call. I don't keep what comes from under. And when the creature at the center of it all nudges a shoe a fraction with its careful end and looks toward me as if to check whether the world is aligned, I nod, and it nods, or maybe the ridges along its back find a new low, and we keep the air between us clean, the only way two kinds of underground can manage, by knowing which of us counts and which of us remembers, which of us opens, which of us refuses, and how often we must trade in silence to keep the ledger closed. At the pharmacy, the lights were still on because Mr. Coe had candles in glass cups stacked beneath the counter, and he had lit 3 of them out of a sense of how much is enough. He had his white coat folded over the back of a stool because he was working now, and the coat is for another time. I need insulin, I said, and formula, and water, and the batteries that make the radio feel like a companion again. You and everyone, he said, which was not a complaint but a fact and a comfort, because if you are going to fall, it is good to fall in a pile. He put 3 vials on the counter without making me ask. He put 2 cans and then a case of powder behind them. He put 4 gallons of water in a row like soldiers, and then said, "Leave 2 for someone you like less than yourself." And it was the kind of joke that makes a line in the day. He handed me a bag of D-cell batteries that felt like a fist. He said, "You will come back for antibiotics. I will have none. You will come back anyway. I will still be here until I am not. Pearl okay?" I said. "She will say she is," he said. "You will know otherwise." On the step outside his shop, I saw the first of the old men from the VFW shuffle past, steady, slow, but with a direction in his head that the dead did not have. He looked at me and raised 2 fingers off the steering wheel that he had not been holding. This is how men here salute boys they accidentally raised. He said, "They're coming up from the culvert," like he was telling me how high the river was, and kept going toward the school. Behind him, even slower, even more practiced, came a woman in a floral housecoat, whose name I did not know, and behind her 2 children, very small, stepping every time she stepped as if they were learning how to be feet. They were not alive. They were a part of what was happening, and what was happening was undoing what we had done. The culvert under the highway is where we used to leave apples for the town foxes when we were 11, and trouble had not yet upgraded its equipment. It empties into the creek that becomes the river that nudges Harrow like a shoulder against the back of a friend. If the dead were coming up from there, it meant they were coming from the edge of everything. The map was becoming religious. Town limits didn't matter because the town was wherever we knew what to call a thing, and there were more and more things we did not know what to call. At the corner of 3rd and Denby, I stopped because something was happening that you don't walk past. The something was 5 boys with broad backs and a plank between them like they were about to carry a boat. They were hockey players, which means they are equal parts gentleman and goat. On the plank lay a woman with her hair in a messy knot and a baby tucked under her shirt. She had a hand on the baby, and the hand made a slow motion with the satisfaction of a metronome. She was not dead, but she had the look of someone whose body has begun a war without asking permission and is now notifying the council that the war is underway. The boys saw me, and their shoulders lifted with that small relief you get when any adult arrives during any situation that is moving too fast. "Where?" said the tallest, and by that he meant tell me what to do, because I am too strong to be gentle unless you give me orders. "School," I said. "Back door. Do not stop for anyone. If anyone touches the board, you hand them the end, and you let go like it was always their job. Do not try to explain. Do not apologize. If someone gets in front of you, you go around the car, not through it." And boys, "Ma'am," he said, because he was a decent boy, and because the part of him that knows the word ma'am will make him a decent man if he lives long enough. If the person in front of you is Mrs. Hudson from the bakery, and she looks like she used to give you cookies in 1st grade, you still go around the car. Their eyes went wide the way boys' eyes do when you say something they didn't know you knew. They nodded like a drill team. They hoisted and moved, and the girl on the plank closed her mouth around a sound she didn't make, because making it would have made the day too true. I could hear the baby gasp once, and then go back to the ancient work. By the time I reached the school again, the parking lot had begun to populate with the wheels of our last chances. Tractors, a camper like a silver loaf, 2 bicycles lying on their sides in a place where bicycles are not usually allowed to lie without correction. Dell's truck sat sideways across the entrance where he'd made his road by being in the way of people who didn't understand the way you make a path here is by blocking the ones that lead out. He stood at the open door of the gym like a really good usher. He had blood on his sleeve now. Not his, and I did not ask. Inside, the sound was what you think a gym will sound like when it becomes a place for people. Whispering, the shush of denim, the ping of something metal going onto a floor you're not supposed to scratch, someone trying not to cry, children trying to sound like their parents, parents trying to sound like heat. Coach had a whiteboard on a chair and wrote on it with a marker that squeaked too much for this kind of day. He wrote water and next to it a line. He wrote me-dees and a line. He wrote names and then underlined it, and then stopped and said no to himself out loud, and drew a hard box around names, and wrote above the box, "Do not say out loud." He looked up at me, and I knew why. Somewhere between the bell that did not ring and the chorus in the graveyard, we had learned another rule. You say a name, and sometimes they come. You think it's superstition until you do it, and the door opens inward, and the person who used to carry that name arrives with it, wearing it like a shirt borrowed out of the dryer before it's ready. I handed him the insulin and the batteries, and he did the thing a coach does, which is he said, "Good job," without making a scene, so the boys would keep trying. He passed the insulin to a woman who held it the way you hold a bird that will stay, and she went and found the girl whose life was made of that medicine. I set the water with the water and the formula under a table where everything looked safe, because it was low and covered by cloth, which is how we make safety out of furniture. I put the batteries beside a stack of shoe boxes, because this is Harrow, and we store things in old shoe boxes, because the people who own the shoe store will always give you the lids. I went back outside because I cannot stand walls when they are doing their best. On the edge of the lot by the light pole stood a woman I do not want to talk about, but I must. She was my sister. Her hair was the color of my mother's at the kitchen sink when the window over the sink was open and the curtain moved and she moved her head so the light found her eyes. She wore my jacket because it makes no sense what stays in a house and what leaves. She looked at me like we were not finished with a conversation that began before she was born. I walked to her and knew she was dead before I knew anything else. Not because she did any of the things the others did. She didn't hum or open her mouth wrong or reach, but because the place in my chest that keeps track of the people I came from stood up fast and then sat down very slowly, and that is grief's shape. "Jamie," I said, and the world did the thing it does now, the small shiver, the sense that the air has been asked to carry more weight than air is built to carry. She blinked, like she didn't appreciate what I had called her, and then she smiled, and it was almost right, and then she took a half step toward me, and I stepped sideways because my body is smarter than my history. She stopped. Either I stopped her or she stopped herself, and I will use that uncertainty to sleep sometimes. I looked at her hands. They were empty. I looked at her feet. There was mud on one shoe. "I'm sorry," I said, because the living are always apologizing to the dead for keeping at it. "I'm sorry. I'll take care of Dad's house. I'll fix the leak in the bathroom. I'll swear." She turned her head a fraction at the word house, and her hands floated that little bit. They all did, as if any word that has ever been said in Harrow now belongs to them. I shut my mouth like it had a lock, and I had finally found the key. She looked at my face like it made something occur to her. She lifted a hand as if to pull at a thread on my jacket, and the hand stayed there, hovering, as if an invisible teacher had said, "Show me patience, class." "Jamie," I said again very gently. She shivered as if I had taken a blanket off her, and then only then she opened her mouth a little and made the smallest sound anyone can make without meaning to, the end of a sigh, and then she turned slowly and walked away, not toward the school, not toward town, but toward the alley that we used to take when we wanted to skip all the parts of the street that required us to be legible to adults. I let her. I stood and watched as if the watching would be put in the minutes at the next meeting of my body and help with a vote I was losing. Behind me, the gym door opened and someone brought out a boombox that had been in the lost and found for 3 years and put it on the steps and turned the radio to AM, because AM is the wave that stays through everything, A voice came out of it that we all knew because in Harrow, you know the voice of the person who pours the coffee, reads the weather, and calls the scores for baseball. Walt from 1430, with his throat like a barn beam and his breath like a metronome. He said, "We are here," and the words were the first right-sized thing I had heard all day. "We are here." He said again, "If you are hearing this, there are people in town, and we are making a center at the high school and at the Lutheran Church on County Road K. Stay inside if you can. If you cannot, move slowly, not because slow is safer, but because it is kinder, and none of us are leaving kindness behind. If you have to say a person's name, say it in your head. If you love someone, love them quieter for a while, and we will see if that matters less than we think. If you have fire, keep it. If you have iron, keep it. If you are out by the culvert, make a noise like a tractor, and then stop and then start again, because he paused, and I could hear him check himself. Choose, decide, because someone who knows about electricity says off and on is our friend. A group of the dead, 7 or 8, came up the hill together, like people returning from a tour of the school they went to in the 70s. They moved toward the sound of Walt's voice as if it had a magnet in it, and they were the kind of metal that wants to be coins. Someone turned the radio down and they looked around, puzzled, as much as a person without that part can look puzzled. Then they kept going, toward the gym door now, and Coach stepped into the frame, big as a door, and said no, the way he says it to boys who think about throwing a basketball after the buzzer. He had a length of rebar in his hand, and he did not raise it, and he did not need to yet. The dead stopped with the slight helplessness of people who have found themselves in a line they don't remember getting into. We learned that day that you can talk to them sometimes if you talk the way a belt talks, or a fence, or the step that creaks every time. You can be a boundary by deciding to be one. I spent the rest of that day doing what a town needs done when it has unlearned its shape. I carried boxes. I lifted old men. I turned away 3 people I have known my whole life because one had the wrong mouth, one had the wrong heat, and one had the wrong number of breaths in a minute. I stood by the alley at 4 and 7 and 9, not hoping exactly, but measuring in case my sister had learned which way a day goes. I hammered boards over a door, not because I thought the dead would knock it down, but because people needed to hear hammering. I listened for the church bell, and when it rang twice, once at sunset by accident, and once at sunset on purpose, I felt the town lean toward the sound as if it would keep us from falling off. That night, when the gym had quieted in the way rooms quiet when 100 people are trying to sleep in them, I took my father's hammer and the bolt cutter and the first aid kit and sat on the steps of the school and watched the parking lot breathe. The dead knew how to stand as if standing were a job. They did not eat, not anything you would recognize, not yet, not that day. They pressed their hands to glass. They tilted their heads. They hummed with their mouths, while the cold crept over the cars and turned them into winter before winter was even ready. Somewhere down Denby, a generator coughed into itself and then thought better. Somewhere on 3rd, a woman laughed once, bright and clean, and then shushed herself out of loyalty to people trying to make a little night. At 11, Walt's voice came out of the boombox again and said, "If you are listening, we are here, and then we are going to try something in an hour. If you have earphones, put them in. If you have a way to close your ears without using your hands, practice now." Then he said, "Softer, because the dead like that better. Harrow, you've done worse things together, and come out with your shirts only a little dirtier. Stop counting how many we lost, and start counting how many we still have." He signed off like he always did, more or less, which is how farmers measure anything that matters. At midnight, the plan was not a plan, but a thing you do because you are out of other kinds. Walt played 2 minutes of steady tone. the kind your television used to make when there was a test of the emergency system. It was old enough that it remembered us. The dead turned their heads, slow as telescopes. Then he made it stutter on, off, on, and you could see them pause the way you do in a grocery aisle when you've forgotten if you were supposed to get beans, and if so, what kind. Then he went back to steady, and then to nothing, and then to a song that is in the DNA here, the one from the ball field that tells you where you are and what kind of afternoon it will be. The dead swayed. They didn't sway together. They didn't have that thing that makes us merge when we hear a rhythm. They swayed like tall grass above a drainage ditch moves when the wind gets confused. He did that for half an hour, and we learned something I wish we didn't. They love what we love when it is easy, and they do not love it when it asks them to choose. When I finally lay down on a wrestling mat beside the bleachers, the floor cold through the foam, the hammer under my head like a very poor pillow, the last thing I heard was the hiss of the gym's heater, thinking about whether to behave like a heater or like a person who loves you enough to pretend that they can do more than they can. Then I dreamed the town the way it used to be, with the parade that goes the wrong way down Main and the floats that look like whatever we had in the garage on Wednesday night. In the dream, everyone who had stood up was sitting down, and everyone who had sat down was standing, and my sister was in the place where the last float waits for the first float to get through the turn, and she waved, and the wave hit me like a small nail, and the nail held. I woke to the sound of the door in the back hall opening and closing in a slow, polite rhythm, and in the space between those two things breathing, and in that breath a voice I knew from county fairs and late summer, and the school roof, soft like the end of a prayer you maybe didn't mean, but said anyway, because your grandmother was looking at you. It said my name from the hallway, the way the wind says your name when it slips under a door. I lay very still because the living learns so fast, and the gym lay very still with me, almost on purpose, and the dead outside pressed their hands to the glass warm through the night. I kept my eyes closed and counted the door, breathing. Open, close, open, close. Whoever or whatever was on the other side had more manners than most things that wanted in. The gym exhaled with me. Somewhere in the dark, a cot creaked. A mother shushed a cough. A boy's trumpet case scraped. The door sighed again and then stopped. The voice didn't. It said my name a second time, then a third, like a person counting off push-ups, easy, even. It wasn't Jamie's. It wasn't Walt's off the radio. It was the sound a late summer field makes when you put your ear near the grass and swear it's saying what you want to hear. Coach stood up without standing all the way, one of those wartime rises he probably learned from film. He made his whole back into a do not cross and moved toward the hall. Dell ghosted him, rebar low, like a shepherd who knows the fence is the animal that matters. The boombox on the steps breathed its static into its hands. "Stay down," Coach murmured, and all the adults obeyed like good kids. When the door opened next, it did it like a polite refrigerator, just enough to make a light. A line of colder air walked in. Nobody was there in it. The voice didn't try the room again. The dead outside didn't react. After a minute, Coach bumped the door with his hip, and it went shut. At dawn, the gym smelled like coffee made wrong, and blankets that have been asked to do more than blankets ought to. We counted. That was the first thing. We didn't say the totals out loud. We kept them on the whiteboard in quiet numbers, with the decimals a little too big, so nobody mistook them for names. Walt came on the radio at 6 with his "We are here," and the sentence put a spine under the day. He'd started to leave seconds of silence between words, like commas we could breathe on. "We're going to do something ugly and sensible," he said, and I loved him for not pretending the two were separate. Mr. Zimmer at the co-op says the old meat locker in the cold storage still takes a chill if you feed it, and the auto shop boys say their generator will sit up and beg if you sweet talk it. Off and on is still our friend. We think cold is our other friend. If you're listening and you've got shoulders and whatever's left of a back, meet at the grain elevator in 10. We'll take the long way so nobody has to hear their own yard. Mr. Noise stopped by the office window on his way past the library and tapped the glass like it was the edge of a hymn book. Don't let the hot touch the not hot, he said to Coach. Matter of fact as weather. It eats the difference. What happens if they do? I asked, stupid as a person paying attention. Nothing, he said. That's the problem. The plan was the kind you hate because it is exactly how small towns survive. A lot of people who know half of something each making a whole. We took tractors with their engines tuned to that slow, even rumble the dead liked, and we tied boom boxes to their fenders. Dell wired an old siren from the band closet to a battery so we could chirp it. Not a call, just a nudge. Mr. Co. produced a roll of caution tape from some pocket of the universe. Pharmacists have. Coach turned it into a ribbon fence with 6 boys who'd learned to build anything if you told them it was for a drill. I found the bolt cutter again, and the part of its orange handle that had kissed the woman by the dumpster was clean, like it didn't want to talk about it. We gathered them out of the streets like fog, patient, no hurting, just pressure. They turned their heads to the tractors the way wheat does to wind. The living made a line that had room for pauses. You can walk a cow just by thinking about where you'd like it to find clover. I suppose the dead were cows for an hour, and we were the kind of people who knew what to do with cows. Harrow Cold Storage sits behind the co-op like a second thought that turned out to own the best tools. The padlock of the third age hung on its hasp, rusty but still with opinions. The auto shop kids rolled up with a triage of cords and a generator that looked like a washing machine and sounded like a very large dog. When it caught, the locker hummed the way your jaw hums when you bite down on a piece of ice. Zimmer, the Zimmer who runs everything that uses a scale, ran his thumb along a gauge and nodded. Ammonia's still on the mountain, he said, which was his way of saying there was something here that cared enough to hurt. We walked them in. That sentence should be wrong. It isn't. The dead came to the door and paused in that considerate way they have when a boundary is talking to them. The cold went to work immediately. You could smell it, cleaner than anything. I stood at the threshold with the caution tape in my hands and imagined it was a ribbon on a present none of us wanted. Pearl took the other end with her bandaged hand and didn't look at me, which was how she said thanks. Coach lifted his rebar once, gentle, to remind a farmer none of us knew anymore that doors are for going through. He went. They all went. 40, 50, we didn't count then. We counted the way you count breaths when you're pretending you're not falling apart. When the room was full enough that it looked like a wedding nobody had dressed for, we backed out. Zimmer swung the door. It weighed in a way that said you can only close me if you mean it. We meant it. The latch that had been old when my father's father was 12 caught like a song ending. Through the little round window, the porthole where we used to peer in at hanging deer and think about Thanksgiving, we watched them. You could see the heat leave them the way you see end of August leave. Faces softened, then fell. Arms remembered how to be weight. One by one, the bodies loosened and arranged themselves on the tile in shapes I'd seen only once before, and not with my eyes. We stayed until even the ones with stubborn shoulders were on the floor. Noise stood on his toes and checked the gauge again. Not hot, he said, satisfied, and patted the door with his fingertips, like you do a horse when it finally lets you near its eyes. It wasn't just the locker. Once we found one way to make a quiet, we kept making it. Down Denby, under the water tower, out by the Lutheran church where Walt said Ruth had put 2 pews sideways and made a gate. The day had bones. The dead learned our lines and then forgot them. That helped more than anything. They forgot. By noon, the gym had breathing room. Not much, but enough that people didn't have to walk sideways to feel allowed. Coach's niece got her insulin. Her mother cried exactly 3 tears and then put her hair into a knot like going to work. Mr. Brady took the bicycle-sized antibiotic at a table beside the broken scoreboard and declared it a sacrifice to the baseball gods, and everyone laughed and then laughed again at the sound of laughter, which had developed an accent overnight. Pearl fell asleep with her bandaged hand on her chest and snored like a cat. Mr. Coe wrote dosages on masking tape and stuck them to things and to people. Dell ate 2 crackers like communion and then pointed his whole body toward County K and said, "Gonna check on the Lutherans," which is how he said "I love you" without inviting argument. For a minute 3, the town had the nerve to think the first day had ended. I went out back to see if the alley was still there, because sometimes they go. It was hiding, but it was there. Jamie did not stand in it. I told myself the same lie everyone tells themselves for as long as they can, that being missing is the same as being in motion, and motion means the end of the sentence isn't here yet. Walt filled the air at 3 with ball scores from 10 years ago, because history is the only comfort we can eat in chunks. He finished with a story about the feed store cat that used to sleep in the seed corn and get carried around town in people's hoods. She liked being close to a job, he said, and you could hear him smile with the one side of his mouth that still believed in summer. At 4, the generator feeding cold storage hiccuped. Everyone turned toward the sound like birds. The boys from the auto shop were on it faster than people would be in cities. They laid hands, sweet-talked, coaxed it back. In the porthole, a finger moved. One finger, just a twitch, probably nerves taught by anxiety. I pressed my hand to the glass and felt nothing from the other side. Not hot, hold. At 5, the siren on the old brick firehouse woke up all at once. It didn't haul itself up a hill the way it had when the day started. It stood up, like a man in church when the hymn is the one that knows his name. It sounded clean. It sounded too clean. We didn't turn it on. Walt didn't. Dell didn't. I looked at the school and saw Coach already moving, hand to belt, rebar remembers, face like a door frame. The siren went steady for 10 seconds like a breath, cut off, came back in 2 hard syllables, then silence deep enough to pour. The dead in the lot below didn't freeze. They pivoted. That was new. Together, with the kind of together that had been missing all day, they turned their faces toward the high school like iron filings finding a magnet. From the back hall, a radio crackled, the cheap walkie the janitors used to use to gossip about which vending machine had eaten whose dollar. It hissed once with old cigarette smoke from someone else's years, and then a voice used it to find me. "Ash," it said in Jamie's voice. Not wrong, not o-mouthed, not humming, just my sister's tone, like we were on the roof over the gym with our feet on the tar paper and the town trying to be a map under us. "You promised we'd climb the water tower the year the pool closed." Coach looked at me. The gym behind him was suddenly a place where names had weight again. On the porthole at cold storage, 4 hands laid themselves, neatly, palm to glass, as if to say we have learned what windows are for. The walkie breathed in. Outside, the siren took a breath with it. The dead in the parking lot took a step at the same time, a row of children who'd finally been told what to do. "Ash," Jamie said. Softer, nearer now, through the radio and not possible, also from the dark mouth of the hall, where the polite door had begun again to open and close. Open and close. "Can I come in?" Every part of me wanted to answer, because kindness is a reflex in Harrow, and reflex is what keeps us alive. I put my hand over my mouth like a child. Through my fingers I felt my breath decide. The siren rose, the dead leaned, the gym inhaled. On the whiteboard, the word names watched us like a trap we'd baited ourselves. Mr. Noise, behind me, said very softly, "Off and on is our friend, until it remembers it has another setting." The door finished opening. The walkie crackled one more time, and through it Jamie said, "Gentle as June, say mine." And somewhere beyond the porthole glass, in the locker where we'd put cold around what we feared, something tapped back a rhythm we had taught it. On, off, on, then held the last beat, like a hand hovering over a bell, about to ring. Now, on to the next story. I learned the sound of the forest before I learned its language. It's not the same thing. The sound is what gets written on Green Ranger forms. Wind through crowns, stream on stone, two-note sweep of an osprey, a pickup grumbling 7 miles away. The language is what gets passed behind the counter in a thermos, written on a scrap of brown paper, folded once. There's something wrong on the north face. Don't camp under the blue wall. After a dry August, if you hear your name in the evening, you make yourself busy. I took the seasonal post at Burnt Top Lookout because moving up and away felt like peeling a bit of grief sticker off the inside of my skull. I told my supervisor I needed altitude. I didn't tell her that the night before my interview, I'd slept on the floor next to my brother's toolbox, trying to remember which wrench he used when our sink sang. The tower was 90 feet of creaking staircase and a glass room with a map table in the center, 8 windows, 2 bunks that could become benches with the right kind of stubbornness, a cast iron stove, a radio that made feelings out of weather. If you've never worked a mountain, you might think the best part is the view. That's wrong. It's the intimacy, tree by tree, notch by notch, the way clouds mean rain, or don't, depending on whether they lift their hems when they pass a certain ridge. You come to know the horizon the way you know a face you used to love. Even when it looks different, it's the same. Our ranger district kept traditions like some families keep recipes. We were required to carry a whistle, but told not to use it unless we wanted the wrong ears. We were told to knot red surveyor's tape in 3s on the north side of a tree if we had to step off a trail after dusk, and to untie our own knots before noon the next day. Someone else would untie them if we didn't come back, but that would be a pity. We were told to carry a small bag of salt and a silver coin, not because we believed, but because belief has a way of borrowing the right pockets. In the watch log, a thick ledger for the tower, older than any of us, someone had copied onto the inside cover a paragraph in a careful hand. There are callings in this forest. Some belong to people, some do not. If you are called by name in a voice you know between the last light and the first, respond in the voice of your work. Say lookout to dispatch, even if your radio is off. Say wind shift to 12 o'clock, even if the air is still. They won't follow you into that language. I laughed at that. I laughed the way you do when you've already planned to do the thing you're being warned not to. It took me a month to write the paragraph into my memory with the same respect as the weather codes. Late July, the heat made a mirage out of distance. The valleys breathed smoke from fires 50 miles south, and it got into everything. My oatmeal, my hair, the shirt I wore to sleep. I woke from a dream where my brother was teaching me to tie a bowline and couldn't remember whether it was the rabbit around the tree or the tree around the rabbit. That afternoon, I put my boots in the shade under the cot to soften the leather and read the incident reports blazing a polite orange on my phone until the service faded to a slow drip. At dusk, a herd of elk moved like thoughts down the eastern meadow. At dusk, the first voice called me by name. It came from the west slope below the tower, where the balsam and hemlock make a dark that looks permanent, even at noon. I was filling the blue jug at the cistern and almost didn't mark it. Maya, it said, in my brother's voice, as if he hadn't gone quiet under an engine, as if he were calling me in for dinner from 3 houses down. It wasn't the exact timbre, it was the fact of him in my mouth, moving out through my teeth like a hot spoon. Look out to dispatch, I said, like an idiot. My radio was off. I set the jug down, and the lid tinked the stone, and I thought, if I imagine this, then I invented it, and if I invented it, then I owe it time. The wind shifted to nothing. Top. The second call came from closer, farther upslope, which is not how sound should travel. My brain didn't endorse it, and my body didn't care. Top. You see that smoke? East of Trout Notch. It was Wes's voice, Wes from the West Unit, who hummed Springsteen off-key and called everyone by their position, as if the day were a chessboard he wanted to unfurl. The map on my table had a thumbprint smudge on Trout Notch, where we like to pretend we had fixed the world. There was no smoke rising from it. The ridge between us and it lay clean and dumb. Look out to dispatch, I repeated and turned my radio on this time. It hissed like a lake before rain. Wind shift to 12 o'clock. My voice sounded obedient and small. The voice tried again, just once, my brother saying my name with a plea inside it like wet rope. Then there was only stomata breath from leaves, and somewhere a nuthatch making an old door noise at a snag. I wrote the date and the phenomenon in the log like a ranger, left a dot of salt on the sill like a child, ate dinner with my boots on like a person who had decided rules could be prayers. If the story is going to earn your time, it needs thresholds. The second threshold was a whistle I didn't blow. 2 days later, the heat broke. Fog came in and made all the shapes polite. I did my routine anyway. Binocular sweep, angle of the shadows, condition of the steel cable on the tower's west guy line. When I came down the last run of stairs, a new row of cairns waited beside the bottom step. 3 stacks of 3 stones each, precise enough to make a surveyor sigh. The stones were local, river rounded, lifted from the creek bed, a half-mile north. They still remembered the varnish of old water. Ranger humor, I thought. Hazel from the East crew liked to unnerve trainees. She once tucked a dozen pine cones under my cot, and then radioed. Cones fall where they're needed. I knocked one cairn over with my toe, because that's what you do when you don't want to be owned by someone else's joke. I carried the stones back to the creek because that's what you do when you've learned not to leave proof. At dusk, someone rebuilt the cairns and added a 4th stack. The 4th leaned. It leaned the way a person leans when they are testing if you will put a hand on them to make them upright. It leaned toward the west slope, toward the dark inside the firs. A voice came from there, low as a fresh burn, and used the exact way my brother had said my name the first time he taught me how to bleed a radiator. I didn't answer. I stood there with my hand on the railing until my fingers learned nothing is actually steady. At midnight, the cairns toppled on their own. At dawn, a circle of powdered soil ringed the base of the tower, like something had pushed fingertips into the dust and drawn the pad of itself around me. The third threshold was a dead radio and a living fire. We'd had dry lightning. It moves across a line of peaks like someone rolling a zipper, striking at places the map has nicknames for: Devil's Tongue, Blue Wall, Widow's Thumb. The storm had run out of water 2 days before and gone to bother another state, but that's not what lightning respects. I caught a faint column down in the draw east of Trout Notch, a whisper of gray, and radioed it in. Dispatch asked for a size up. I gave them the right words: single tree torching, slope 30%, fuels mixed conifer with cheatgrass. That's what I saw. What I didn't say: the smoke rose and then paused like breath, then rode a loop in the air and put itself back in place. There's ways to explain that. Thermals, a fluke of wind, or you can decide you won't be taught something by a phenomenon you don't respect. We sent a crew. We had to. Rules, even the ones that can't save you, are better than guessing. I heard the chopper before I saw it. Up valley, a dragonfly that didn't believe in grace, hauling red buckets like second thoughts. On the highway 7,000 feet and 3 ridges away, I watched 2 engines antline past the bend where the cliffs still remember werewolves from cowboy movies. I tracked them in the mirror, compass marking a slow bucket depression toward the draw. The first radio call came as the chopper hovered, rotors stomping the canopy into submission. Dispatch. This is Helitack 6. We have eyes on the column, and can you confirm ground? A beat. 2. The woman at the board had been on longer than any of us. Helitack 6, go ahead. Yeah, I've got. The pilot's voice clipped. I've got no heat signature. I still have visual on smoke. No heat. I'm going to make a pass. Down on the highway, the engines made lights where no one could see them. The crew boss called in their turn onto the spur road, and the taste of dust came up through my tongue as if the line between our bodies had betrayed me. The pilot made another pass with the FLIR and swore softly into his mic because his instrument cluster knew him and knew he wasn't prone to superstition. Negative heat. We're going to set down at Trout and reassess. The first engine's brakes squealed in the switchback like fear. I interned with those crews once. I know what an engine brake means. In my binoculars, I watched men and a woman. We've all eaten terrible burritos with check straps, shoulder ash packs, go to their little green gods for a safe, and then one man, Ephraim, whose kid draws fire engines like dragons, stop, hold his hand in the air, cock his head. He turned to face the furs. He nodded like someone had explained a thing, and then like a sane man, he looked up at my tower to see if I had understood it with him. From the west slope below my feet, a voice called, sweet as a beer at shift change. Ephraim. Ephraim took 3 steps toward where I would have taken 3. The crew boss put a hand on his shoulder and said something I couldn't hear. Ephraim shook himself like a dog after rain. I swallowed my voice. They cut a line around a fire that was a smoke that was a promise without a flame, and for 2 hours did work that keeps men alive and is sometimes purely symbolic. At sunset, the smoke looped itself like a thought and went out. The crew drank water in the notch and ate something that had the right caloric balance and felt heavier than it deserved. Ephraim untied his boot and poured out a pebble. In the empty space under my tower, someone who knew my name arranged 5 stones into a run that pointed like a compass needle at the trees. After that, we stopped pretending. Hazel came up with 3 days' food and the kind of smile that only shows up when you've already had to decide whether you think someone is stupid or brave. She had 2 ancient traditions in her pack and no patience for the modern ones. One tradition was a single bell, small and wrong for calling cattle or children. It had fish stamped around its little bronze belly and a split across the lip where someone who didn't know better had rung it too hard. We don't ring what we didn't hang, I said, quoting the log. We don't, she agreed, but I want you to know I brought it, and I want you to know I know better. The second tradition was older. Hazel set a small linen pouch on my map table and unrolled it so the 4 corners lay to the compass. Inside was something I had never seen on paper and had only heard described with the reverence reserved for recipes that half a town believes will bring a dead person to the door if you make them right. A wrapping of hair and twigs bound with nettle and thread. The loop of it knotted 3 times with something that looked like sinew and wished it wasn't. My grandmother made this, Hazel said. She called them borrowers. Her grandmother called them something in a language I'd disrespect if I tried. They borrow the shape of a voice to get you to take 1 step off your line. Some are harmless, some barter, some are just hungry for the pair your feet make. If you don't go when they call, they follow. If you blow a whistle, they answer with their own teeth. If you play an instrument, they watch your hands until they can do what hands do. They hate knots. They love repetition. They'll put anything in pairs, and they can't stand it if you speak in work. In work. The language, she said, gesturing out of the windows at what was trying to be a world, the part of you that's verbs. That's why the notes in the log say to call for wind shift when they call you by name. They can have a man's voice. They can't say 10-hour brush assignment without bleeding. Tie this around the leg of the map table and don't untie it. And Maya. We hadn't said my name out loud until then. Hearing it made me feel like I'd tripped and landed on childhood. Yeah, when you have to step off a trail after dark, and you will, talk about what you're doing like a prayer. Right foot, north foot, 2 steps, brush, snag. If you run out of nouns, make them up. Don't give them adjectives. They eat those. Is this a test? I said. It's a job, Hazel said, and grinned without teeth. They came the next night. Not one, many. Voices like the rack of a shed lying in leaves and deciding to stand. They didn't try my brother again. They had learned something about me and were polite enough to acknowledge it. They used Wes until I could hear the smile tucked behind his call, and then they used a voice so kind I didn't have to remember who it belonged to in order to obey it. Top, it said. We've got Browning north of the old scar. You seeing that? It would have been nothing to pick up the binoculars, to step to the rail. It would have been nothing to say affirm and give them the lever. I did what Hazel had told me. Look out to dispatch, I said. Wind shift to 12. Slope 30%. Brush manzanita. Fuel load liar. It felt ridiculous to say liar into a radio that didn't care about my metaphors. The calling paused. For 3 heartbeats, the entire hillside held its dear breath. Then, right under my tower, something set 2 stones together and pressed them into the powder until the powder made a halo around their twins. I slept in my boots. Morning didn't make it better. Morning just made it brighter. The cairns were back, careful and ridiculous, and a braid of manzanita lay on my bottom step, tied in the same knots as Hazel's bundle around my table leg. I left the braid where it sat because not interacting is a form of interaction, and I wanted to save stupid braveries for when they mattered. Around noon, a family in matching hats that said "Bring back the lynx" hiked up the far trail, sweating good honest sweat, talking in a loop about how the youngest was drinking enough water. Is the tower open? They asked with faces that assumed the world would be kind. I told them we'd closed it to the public for the week due to maintenance. I told them if they saw a pile of stones, they should take pleasure in kicking them. They laughed like I was eccentric and kept going. They didn't come back. We found them at dusk below the blue wall, where the creek braids, and the cheat grass pretends to be a carpet fit for camping. We found the father first because the father was heavy enough to keep his place. He lay at the base of a fir with his eyes open, as if looking at a bird a long way up. The boy was 30 feet downslope, folded as if by love into a cradle of roots. The mother lay beyond the boy with her hands in fists, as if she had wanted to punch the sky and had only remembered how to hold on. None of them had a mark. Their shoes were off, the laces tucked with a care that made me nauseous, the pairs set neat. 5 small cairns circled the father's head. They might have looked beautiful from above if you were the kind of thing that likes patterns. We did the work that comes with that. I spoke in the voice of my work, words for maps and methods and the numbers you say because you have to say something you can live with. The hello came again, the one with the tender pilot who refuses to dramatize his voice into a version other men can worship. He took them away in the basket, and I didn't hear names, because names would have made me choose a corner in my body to sit in and cry. After the rotor wash had lifted the grief from the meadow and flung it at the brush until the brush wore it, I saw the boy's hat in the fork of the manzanita. When I picked it up, 2 small stones fell out of the crown, a pair side by side weeping dust. I don't know what you want from me next. The right story would have me march down the slope with Hazel's bell and do a foolish, effective thing. The true story has a leaner hero. The next morning, the smoke from the south settled into the draws and did paperwork on our lungs. Dispatch rerouted our engines and our crews to help counties with less luck. Hazel gave me half her coffee and told me her grandmother used to leave a bowl of milk on a stump for borrowers, and that when they came in the morning, the milk would be thick and blue and smell like the sinus of a wave. We don't do that here, she said. But if you see a circle of powdered soil that isn't wind, you don't step inside it unless you want to be told stories you weren't ready for. I promised not to, because I am a good liar. That night, I followed a sound a sane person wouldn't. It was too late for daylight and too early for anything else. My watch said 11, which meant nothing to the trees. The call began as the clatter of deer hooves on basalt. It turned at the big snag where the woodpeckers teach their children percussion. It slowed by the spring where the old pipes still fussed under the mud. It was Wes for a little while, and then my boss from the shop floor at the mill I had worked at the year my brother left for Idaho. When it became my mother, I showed my boot soles to the sky and went back up the steps like I had been called for dinner for the last time. By the third step, the voice inside the voice gave up. I think about that sometimes, the little sigh inside the work a thing is doing, when the work doesn't feed it. I closed the hatch, and I tied a knot, and I sat on the floor and put one hand on the map table and one hand over my throat, and I said, "Look out to dispatch. Wind shift to 12. Brush lie. Manzanita liar. Ridge, your mother." Hazel laughed asleep on the bench and said my name from the underside of her tongue, and my brother answered inside my jaw with the little tick of a wrench that has found the right notch. There are callings in a forest that are only the memory of a thing trying to stay alive. If you feed them, they come back with better manners. If you starve them, they walk the line between the trees and practice their steps until you give them something else to do. On the 7th day after the family in matching hats left their shoes neat as a sin, the wind went weird. It spun the smoke like thread and drew a line of it toward the west slope, toward the place the voices like to teach themselves. It smelled like antiseptic and wet paper and a wool sweater that has been left damp in a bag. The floor of the tower throbbed like the undernote of a bell not rung. Hazel sat up and said very evenly, "Okay." She has a way of ending a life with that word that doesn't actually require choosing death. She untied the little bundle from the table leg and tucked it under her shirt and put the knot bell in her pocket. "You'll burn me if it goes wrong," she said. "I'm not a person who finds jokes funny when they are true. I'll come with you," I said. "No," she said more gently than I deserved. "You will call my position, and you will speak in a work that the borrowers can't mimic, and you will make them stand still. If I'm still standing at dawn, I'll tell you why we don't ring it, which you already know." We went down the tower stairs. The night had the wrong number of stars. Somewhere south of us, a tree fell without having the decency to make noise. Hazel walked the way women do when they've decided fatigue is a thing they'll pay for later. I called our position on the hour and the half hour, and whenever my breath got ambitious, "On spur from top to west," I said, "passing snag, brush manzanita, snag carpenter ant, pileated owl at 9 o'clock, who would prefer not to be relevant, wind shift to 12, static," I said, and put my ear to the porthole, which pierced me with clean cold and the smell of something 2 winters old. I put my mouth to the steel and breathed out nonsense, not words, the hiss of the gym's heater, the sound of Coach's marker squeaking too hard, Walt's throat clearing before he says we are here, the things we'd fed them all day. I gave them back wrong. On the other side of the door, something big gave its weight to the floor. "Again," Dell said, and I did it again, louder, stupider, dumber, whatever you want to call the act of giving the world every wrong answer you can think of, because a man you trust told you to. The latch settled. "Good," Zimmer said, and kissed the gauge because some machines are still allowed to be churches. We would have had a whole minute of feeling like we were getting away with it if the water tower hadn't made a sound like someone knocking on the hull of a ship from the inside. Not the horn, not infrasound, not wind. Knuckles. 1, 2. Pause. 1. The kind of polite knock you give a neighbor because you don't want to be a problem. Dell turned his head toward the tower like a dog. I did too, because I am a dog when it comes to the water tower. It has been talking to me since I was 8 and climbed the fence to see if the inside tasted like pennies. It does. On the catwalk, the small figure still stood. "She know," It lifted its hand again, and then it did the meanest thing that has been done to me in a long time. It waved like goodbye. Don't, I said, and heard the word leave me and go straight up and bounce off the mint paint and come back down as a voice out of the walkie in my pocket. My own voice played back to me like a joke. Don't, the radio said calmly, and out in the lot 50 heads turned toward the sound. The dead started to climb, not fast, not like in a movie, slow, careful, like men who've done ladders their whole lives and know there's no prize for the top rung if you miss the one below. Hands on the chain link, hands on steel, hands cupping rungs, 1, 2, 3, and even the ones who had never climbed anything in life knew how to, because muscles know stairs, even when brains don't. Back to the tower, Dell said to me, to the boys. Hold the juice. No dips. Don't let her teach you a rhythm. To Noise, keep counting wrong. To Pearl and Co., if you hear me say a name, tell Coach to shut every door like it owes him money. We ran. Father Rick said, bless it again, and this time something like amusement came with it, because even priests have to laugh when a town insists on being itself in the middle of its own ending. Halfway to the tower, Walt came into our pockets. We are here, and then he didn't say anything for so long that the silence seemed like a new, tender animal we might get to keep. At the base, the first pair of dead were already on the ladder. They didn't look up. They looked at their hands. That was worse. Behind them, the others gathered in a patient queue like people at the fair waiting for corn dogs. The wind shifted and brought me a scent I will never be rid of. Summer rain on hot iron, and under that, mint paint, and under that, my sister's shampoo from the one bottle we bought at the city when we thought smells could make us different people. Up, Dell said, and we went, because the top is where the hinge is, and this day had taught us that the hinge is the only thing you can hope to own. The figure on the catwalk stepped backward toward the ladder opening and was gone. No drama, no fall, no lesson, just gone like steam. Halfway up, the walkie in my pocket hissed, and Jamie's voice, hers, from the kitchen, from the pool, from the long Tuesdays when Dad was late at the shop and we ate cereal out of the box, said cheerful as a dare, race you. I didn't say no. I bit down on the word and tasted pennies. We hit the catwalk. The horn was a dead thing with a torn throat. The water tower was a living thing with a slow heartbeat. The first of the dead had their hands on the ladder hatch. Their heads rose like planets over the rim. Dell swung the rebar and broke fingers without apology. I set the bolt cutters in the chain of the hatch and shut it on the knuckles of a man who had once covered the field at Harrow High in lime and used his hat like a flag at T-ball. He didn't yell. He did what they all do. He repositioned. Ash, the walkie said against my hip, soft as the end of the school day. Say mine. Behind us, 2 blocks away, the latch at cold storage lifted a hair with the exact same patience. In the gym, the polite door opened enough to make a line of light a blade. Down below, the comma of bodies looked up at us and found a curve. Dell took his eyes off the rungs long enough to look right into me. Don't, he said, not like a command, but like a plea. I closed my hand over the radio, and it felt like holding a throat. The dead set their feet on the first ring of the hatch. The hornless tower gave another belly knock from inside. The gym door took a breath it didn't need. On, Jamie said in my pocket, sweet as summer. The long hand on my father's watch, on my wrist, because grief makes you borrow everything, ticked. I could feel the beat gathering, the town lining itself up for whatever was next. Off, the thing at cold storage tapped back. On came Walt, steady, because he had forgotten he was allowed to do anything else. Say mine, Jamie whispered. I opened my mouth, and the catwalk shook with a dozen hands finding the next rung. I closed my mouth. The name got as far as my teeth and stuck there, a penny on the tongue. I took the walkie out, thumb over the button so hard it hurt, and dropped it into the open throat of the horn, into the wet dark of the housing where sound had lived. It clacked off metal and clanged down somewhere we couldn't reach. Jamie's voice cut out as clean as a snipped thread. The catwalk shook with new hands on the rungs. Wheel, Dell said, chin at the standpipe valve. Every water tower has a secret wheel. It's for flushing rust and testing hydrants, and for boys to dare each other to turn a quarter inch and then run. This one was stiff with October. I put my weight on it. It resisted like a promise you shouldn't have made. Dell put his hands over mine. The wheel decided it had known us a long time and turned. It didn't gush. It thundered the way a storm under a barn roof does, sudden and present and bigger than anger. The latter became a waterfall. The first two on the hatch took it in the chest, in the face, in the place where heat lives. They didn't flail. They learned. Their hands slipped because even hands that remember rungs don't remember water moving like that. They fell without any of the theater that would have made it easier. The second row stepped forward, and the water took them too. The spray came up in our faces full of the town's minerals and the taste of 1,000 summers. In the lot below, bodies flinched as rain they hadn't planned on found them and cooled them down into the old slowness. We knew how to shepherd. Hold it, Dell said, and I held it, and the wheel complained, and the tower sang low under us, as if grateful to be what it was built to be, and not a mouth for a minute. At cold storage, the latch tried once as if to keep the rhythm. Zimmer put both hands on the chain and leaned like a man teaching his stubborn mule to square up. The gauge stayed where it ought. The fog at the porthole cleared and then frosted again, like someone remembering how to breathe wrong on purpose. Noise tapped nonsense into the cinder block, and the knocking inside tried to answer nonsense and failed, which was the point. In the gym, the polite door cracked and shut, once, twice, tasting the air. Coach's stay got bigger without getting louder, the kind of boundary old dogs respect. Walt said, "We are here," and then told us the barometer had decided not to misbehave yet, and he left a whole hour of snow in the silence that followed. The water took our arms. It always does. I could feel in the wheel every gallon we were spending. Harrow doesn't have an ocean. It has the tower and the river, and what we keep in pots. The town was giving us what it had. In exchange, bodies let go. The patience went out of them. They became heavy again. They became ours to move and stack and walk around. Enough, Dell said when enough came. We shut the wheel. The water slowed to a scold and then to a drip that would last 3 days if no one got a wrench. Down on the gravel, the ones who'd fallen were on their backs looking at the sky like children, steam coming off them in a truce. The ones who were still standing stood more like statues again, which is a kind we could live with. We chained the hatch and pinned the chain with the bolt cutter's mouth like a bite. I hammered the link flat with the butt of the rebar until it looked like it had been made that way in some far-off factory. We backed off the catwalk together, not trusting anything just because it wasn't moving. Halfway down, my pocket lightened with the absence of the walkie, and I felt homesick for something I shouldn't. I don't know how to write the next part without sounding like I'm making it up. The water tower knocked again, polite, knuckles on hull, and it did the exact pattern my father used when he came home late from the shop and didn't want to wake us, but did. 2 short, 1 long, and then the pause where you are supposed to breathe. It came from inside the tank, or from the steel, or from the part of me that still knows what my father's boots weighed. I did not answer. I told the knock to go to the gym and apply at the office window like everyone else. On the ground, the line toward cold storage had gone soft. You could smell not hot from here, a clean nothing smell that made the hair on my forearms lie down and be grateful. The boys had their hands on the generator, the way you hold a sleeping toddler's legs. The machine purred like a dog that knows it will be needed later. We took a tour of our triangle. because that's how you keep a day from coming apart. You walk its corners, and you touch them with your two hands, and you say, out loud or in your throat, still here. The gym was still here. Coach's niece was asleep under a folding table with a knit hat pulled down over her eyes. Mr. Coe had written times on his own arm so he wouldn't ask anyone else to remember. Pearl had her hand up on a stack of mats, palm open like she was letting the room take her temperature. When she saw us, she nodded the tiny nod of someone who won't cry in front of men with jobs. You can rest, Coach lied, because that's how you get people to keep standing. You did 2 days' worth. It's still the first day, I said. It's always the first day, he said. We went to the firehouse and sat on the steps and looked at the hole in the sky where the siren had been part of the day for so long. Our bones had grooves for it. To put the rebar across his knees and stared at his hands like they were a map, and he was trying not to learn a bad route. They'll come, he said. Who? I said, because questions are a kind of rest. County, state, somebody with a vest you won't wash, because it smells like the place where decisions happen. And when they do, they'll call it something that does not mention us, and they'll leave us a brochure. Okay, I said, we'll still have the tower, he said, and cold, and Walt, and coach, and all the wrong numbers Noise can find in his pockets. Okay, I said again, because enough okay can be a wall. Walt gave us dusk. He put it on AM so it wouldn't slosh around, and he played the kind of static that sounds like heat rising off cut hay. We are here, he said at full dark, and then he said nothing for so long that I felt my own voice get quiet, because the room around it was doing a better job than I was. Father Rick walked by, shoulders hunched against nothing, and touched each lintel with his thumb as if he had oil on it. We made rounds. We put bodies where they wouldn't teach the living anything by accident. We told kids stories that were just inventory lists with better verbs. We ran hose to the generator in case the gas station's tanks were shy. We took names without saying them. We were a town. At midnight, the cold was the kind that sharpens your hearing for you. A stack of metal chairs can sound like a bad decision. A cough can sound like a plan. I lay down on a wrestling mat again, except this time I didn't pretend the hammer was a pillow. I put it on my chest like a belt buckle and listened to the building breathe. My mouth learned to shape the word no around the shape of the name I would not say. The room learned to hear me anyway. Jamie did not come to the door. The door did not teach itself new tricks. I saw her once in the alley at 3 a.m., or the shape that had borrowed her posture, and she did not wave. She stood like a person waiting for the part where you remember a punchline. After a long moment that hurt, she turned and went into the kind of dark that only alleys make. I let that be our goodbye, because letting it be anything else would have set a name. Toward morning, we made a plan the way people who have slept 2 hours make plans. Ambitious, obvious, fair. We'd move the small ones and the sick to the fairgrounds on 12, because the metal barns there can be made into cold if you treat them right, and because there are fences and bleachers, and the kind of bathrooms that make sense in a world without water, if men with wrenches have time. We'd put the dead we loved at St. Mike's, in the chapel, because we are allowed to have a place where we visit our names. We'd leave a radio with Walt, and another with Father Rick, and a third with Coach, and we'd teach the radios to speak wrong. It would have been a good plan if days had ever cooperated. Just before sun, when the sky becomes that careful pink that used to make me think of the girls on the track team stretching in a row, the pipes in the school hummed. Not the heater, not the drinking fountains, the pipes. You could hear it through the floorboards, through your teeth. On, off, on. A respectful knock traveling the run of the building like someone taking attendance behind the walls. In 100 kitchens that used to be ours, sink drains breathed. In the laundromat, 40 hoses made a cord. Under the gym stage, where the band keeps the drums and the clarinets in dusty cases, the old radiator exhaled a word it hadn't been taught, and then, embarrassed, tried to make it sound like steam. The town had decided it was a radio. It was always going to learn the plumbing, Noise said. Not triumphant, not scared, just exact. He stood in the doorway with his hands in the same comfortable angle he used to hold at the edge of the library table. It can carry a rhythm anywhere there's a pipe. Don't give it one. Walt came into our pockets with his one sentence, and then a weather report pitched so gentle it felt like a hand on the back of your neck when you're trying not to cry. We are here, he said. Wind light and variable. Precipitation possible if we act like it. He left us the snow. At cold storage, the fog at the porthole made a shape I will always see in water. 4 strokes, quick, practiced, H, then a faint tail, a vertical, a crossbar, A, then R, then nothing, a palm, frost again. I loved whoever was in there long enough to hate that they were learning. Hold them, Zimmer said to the boys, and they held, and the generator purred like money we didn't owe anyone. The dead in the lot stood with their hands just shy of the doors and didn't test anything. They waited, which is what makes them worse. They waited the way you wait for a song you know to start again. I went to the gym steps and sat where I could see the water tower and the locker and the doors we were keeping shut with grammar and habit and the love we were willing to make heavy. The hammer handle had a notch in it now that my father would have sanded smooth if he'd had time. I rubbed my thumb over it like a rosary. Ash, Dell said, sitting 3 steps down because that's where sheriffs sit when they're not exactly off duty. When somebody comes, don't let them measure us in any unit they brought from somewhere else. They'll bring clipboards, I said. That's what I'm saying, he said, and let himself grin for 1 second so I could collect it. Sun took the edge off the gym windows. The first hour of day arrived like a truck shifting gears on 12. We breathed. The pipes breathed back. We had made it through the first day. And then the boombox on the steps turned itself up, a whisper without touching its knob. The static thinned, as if the air had gotten interested in it. Walt didn't do it. He would have said his sentence first. The snow pulled back, and as neat as you please, in a voice pitched exactly right for our town, came mine. We are here, my voice said, warm as coffee, easy as porch talk. Ash, it added, like the pause after the weather when Walt calls scores. Say mine. Behind me, inside the gym, the polite door started to open as if to teach itself a new word for hinge. At cold storage, the latch lifted a thickness of a fingernail. Out by the water tower, something inside the tank knocked, and not the pattern we'd taught it. A new one. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. The radiator under the stage answered in the same time. Hummingbirds of sound in the pipes picked it up and carried it down. Denby through the co-op into the laundromat, up Main, into my father's kitchen where I hadn't finished emptying the drawers. Coach stood and put his hand on the doorframe like he could hold the building still with the palm of his hand. Mr. Coe picked up a tape-wrapped pill bottle and a broom in the same motion. Peril lifted her bandaged hand and nodded once at me like you nod at someone who's about to run out into the street to catch a child who has not learned cars yet. Noe started counting wrong so loudly the numbers felt like weather. Walt didn't say anything. Maybe he was listening. Maybe the dead had made a clip of his throat and were threading it through my voice. Maybe every radio in every kitchen in this part of the state had found the same station where the only program is copies of us. I stood up. The hammer felt like a vote. The day put its hands on my shoulders and waited to see if I would say a name or make a noise or do the next obvious thing, which is stand between your town and the part of itself that wants to learn how to open. No, I said to the air, to the pipes, to the radio, to the tanks and the bells, and the grammar of us. Not today. The gym door breathed in. Cold storage tapped out its new math. The water tower answered with its belly. My voice on the radio laughed like it had learned how, and then, sweet as a childhood lie, said, "Okay." We stepped into the second first day. The pipes sang. Something, somewhere, started counting with us, and from the far edge of Harrow, where the river turns and the county line pretends it matters, another siren, a different pitch, a different town, woke and cleared its throat as if it had a speech to make and had figured out our language overnight. Now, on to the next story. The first time I took the sleep tech job at Mercy East, I told myself I was doing it for the quiet. Overnight shifts sounded like penance I could live with. Unhooking sensors, pouring decaf, making notes while monitors breathed their little electric sighs. The hospital had been closing one wing at a time for years, selling off equipment like old furniture, and the sleep lab was all that remained on the 5th floor. It used to be pediatrics. If you peeled the soundproofing off the walls in room 2, you could still see cartoon whales floating through paint the color of fever dreams. My supervisor, a hawk-eyed respiratory therapist named Iris, met me in the elevator with 2 clipboards and a packet of peppermint tea. "It's dead up there," she said. "You'll like it. Just don't go past the double doors at the end of the hall." "Construction?" I asked, because hospitals always have a reason to say no. "Decommissioned," she said. "They sealed it when they moved neonatal to the West Campus. The negative pressure fans still kick on in the middle of the night. Power's snaked from a sub-panel that doesn't remember it got retired. It sounds like breathing. If you hear it, ignore it. If you think you hear crying, definitely ignore it. What about if I hear my name?" She looked at me for a beat like I'd skipped ahead in the training and spoiled her favorite quiz. "Use the radio," she said. "Use the voice of your work." It was the same instruction my mother gave me before I moved out after my brother died. If something calls you out of sleep in a voice you can't place, get up and count your shoes. If there are more or fewer than the number you own, wake the house. Mercy East's 5th floor had the feel of a room that knows the party ended last night. The linoleum remembered shoes. The glass remembered names on tape on doors. The sleep lab occupied 4 rooms and a narrow monitoring station set in the crook of the hall, with a low desk and 3 rolling chairs that refused to go straight. We had 6 beds, 2 working CPAPs, a closet full of electrodes, and a coffee machine that made Mercy taste like powdered milk. I had 2 patients my first night, a trucker who called himself Mike like it was an agreement, and a woman in her 60s named Arlene, who wore bright lipstick and a cardigan, the color of the fluorescent humming. Mike snored the way a man breathes when he's convinced the world will keep running without him. Arlene lay on her side, as still as a promise, and held her hands clasped against her chest, like a person who had spent a lifetime waiting to be good. I set the leads on their scalps and wrists, and watched the monitors bloom into lines. EEG, EOG, EMG, airflow, thoracic and abdominal effort, different languages writing the same poem. During lights out, I tucked myself into the monitoring station with a blanket I'd folded into squares, the way my brother used to fold maps. The hallway beyond the lab ran in a straight shot to the double doors Iris had warned me about. Someone had taped a faded stop sign across them, the kind with a cartoon hand in the middle, palm raised, a smile below it, for children too brave for their own good. At 1:14 a.m., Mike's oxygen dipped like a courtesy bow. I turned up his pressure and watched the line correct itself. At 2:03, Arlene's REM started, the faint, rapid eye movements like windshields in rain. Sometime around 3, the building sighed. The negative pressure fans in the sealed wing kicked on, and the double doors flexed inward and settled and flexed again, as if someone behind them had leaned forward to listen. The radio at my elbow crackled with the sound of air trying to be a sentence. 5th to Central, I said. Audio anomaly at 5 East. Checking status. A voice I didn't recognize answered with too many consonants. Copy anomaly. The static peeled away like old paint. The building exhaled. At 3:13, the hallway lights warmed. I hadn't touched the panel. Beyond the double doors, faintly, as if from a room down a road, a bell chimed. It wasn't a crisp tone. It was a metal sound softened by cloth, as if the bell had been wrapped and struck anyway. A nurse once told me the neonatal unit had kept a little bell by the incubators for emergencies, the kind you'd ring when you didn't want to alarm the parents but needed the room to notice. Don't go past the doors, Iris had said. She hadn't said, don't look. I walked down the hall, my shoes whispering to linoleum. The double doors had little rectangular windows set at adult eye level. I went to my knees like a person who has learned humility in cheap apartments and looked through the metal-framed glass at a length of hallway more empty than the part I was on. The lights farther down flickered with the leisurely rhythm of old fluorescent tubes. Beyond them, at the next intersection, something moved past, too tall, too careful. I went back to the station and sat because sitting can be a verb you use to reclaim a room. The ECG beeps arced their patient pulses. The building held its breath and let it go. At 3:27, Arlene's EEG did a thing I hadn't seen in training. 3 clean spikes, like a hand tapping a glass. Then a flatness that wasn't quite flattening. Then a rise, as if something had called her name from an angle that her sleep owed attention. Iris wasn't answering the radio. The line buzzed with the deliberate pretense of competence. I looked at the door to room 2. Arlene lay where she had lain, hands clasped, hair netted in leads. Her lips moved around a word, or a breath, or a habit. The paper on her pillowcase had wrinkled in a perfect line where her head had dragged when she turned half an inch, and the crease looked like writing. Something tapped the glass of the double doors. Not loudly, the way a person knocks when they don't want to wake the wrong sleeper. I told myself it was thermal contraction, old metal in the building's lungs. Something tapped again, softer. I tried the voice of my work, 5th to Central, door anomaly, 5 East, neonatal wing, visual of motion beyond, request status. No answer, only the fans rising. The air smelled sweet with the sweetness you get from paper left wet too long, and under that, the medical antiseptic that lives where names are written on bands and stuck to wrists. I went to the doors. This time I didn't kneel. There's a point where dignity feels like a talisman, and you polish it by not bending. Through the little window, I watched a length of hallway that had learned silence the way people learn languages and marriages, by repetition, by compromise. Somewhere down the hall, a bell chimed. I could see the cord faintly, hanging across the intersection like an artery. Someone pulled it in that careful way that makes objects behave. The bell chimed again, soft as if wrapped and rung. In room 2, Arlene's REM line looked like the heart rate of a person who had finally allowed themselves to cry. I stepped away from the doors and went to her. "You're okay," I said in a voice I hoped would convince us both. Her eyes moved behind their lids like she was looking at something she couldn't afford. A tear slid out and caught the tape at her temple. The bell chimed a 3rd time, a little harder, metal remembering itself. The double doors flexed. A draft moved down the hall and slid under my sleeves. I smelled milk. It was old and not cruel, like a song someone hummed in the wrong key on purpose. Central to 5th, the radio hissed and corrected itself. Status check. 5th, I said, grateful for the part where I got to be a professional. 2 patients stable. Possible door failure, 5 East. Audio stimuli from decommissioned wing. What kind of stimuli? The voice asked. It sounded like a man who had been told not to smoke for 20 years and had decided on cigars instead. A bell, I said, like neonatal. A pause long enough to hold a decision. Copy, don't engage. That should have been the end of the first night. I should have kept my chair in its bailiwick and watched lines become lines. The building, though, had learned my footsteps. The fifth floor has a particular echo when you walk carefully. The sound comes back to meet you a second sooner than it should, as if parts of the corridor are closer than they appear. Someone stepped outside the double doors and waited. That's what it felt like, as if a person had put their hand on the jamb on the far side, out of sight, and leaned so their weight made the center of the door bow. When I took the sleep tech job, Iris had handed me two things not on any inventory: a little pouch of salt and a silver coin. The janitors used to leave salt lines when they waxed, she said, as if the statement connected. If you feel stupid using them, that's fine. Feeling stupid is cheaper than feeling wrong. I walked to the doors with the coin warm in my pocket. I could feel the vibration through the metal where a palm pressed from the other side. Don't, I said, because the word fits in so many mouths, and the pressure eased like a favor. The bell on the far side chimed again. Not a command, an invitation. It would be easy to believe in harmless hauntings in a building that has already taken your tax dollars. The pediatric wails under the soundproofing would encourage you to soften the edges. The headline said, "Graybridge Farewell to Nicholas Gray." Under it was a grainy photo of a man with a violin. He wore a dark suit. He had a pale, serious face. The caption read, "Village Fiddler Perishes Saving Brother from Thin Ice. Ferryman Family Mourns." I read the story. It wasn't long. It said Nicholas Gray played at dances and weddings and at the ferry landing on weekends. It said his younger brother fell through the ice near the old post. It said Nicholas reached him with a rope. It said both went under. Only the younger brother came back. It said the town tossed coins in the water in the spring for luck. It said people heard music over the lake at night, every winter after. "Ferryman," I said. "This town is named after him, after his family," Jessa said. "The Grays, Gray Bridge, Gray Bridge. They ran the ferry before the county put in the road." Air J leaned close to the screen. "Look at the second paragraph," he said. "It says the town held a collection. It says they bought a headstone with a violin carved on it." "Where is it?" I asked. "St. Helena," Jessa said. "That's the little cemetery behind the feed store. People leave pennies on it." "Why pennies?" I said. "Luck," she said, "and payment." "Payment for what?" "For crossing," she said, and then shook her head hard like she was mad at herself. "For nothing. It's just what people do. Come on, let's get hot chocolate." On the way home, I kept the picture in my head. A man in a dark suit with a pale face, a violin tucked under his chin, the word ferryman. The old postway out past the safe places, coins in the water, a headstone with a violin on it, pennies. That night, I told myself I would sleep. I brushed my teeth. I set my alarm for 7. I put my phone face down so I wouldn't see the screen light up with nothing. I turned out the light. At 12:04, the music started. I tried to ignore it. I pulled my pillow over my head. The pillow smelled like laundry soap and my own hair. It didn't block the sound. It slid around the edges and came in anyway, like a draft through a bad window. The song was the same as the night before. High, thin, not sad, not exactly. It was more like someone practicing a happy song very slowly. I got up. I looked out. The trees were black lines against a gray sky. Tiny snowflakes fell straight down. The street was empty. The lake looked flat and calm. The song got a little louder when I pressed my ear to the glass. It felt like it was coming from the left, toward the park, toward the dock with the sign that said no winter access. I put on my coat and boots. My heart beat fast, then slow, then fast again, like a machine that needed oil. My breath made steam in the hall. The front door creaked like it was trying to talk me out of it. I opened it just enough to fit through. The cold wrapped around my face like wet cloth. My eyelashes stuck together. The snow squeaked under my boots. Our walkway wasn't shoveled. My feet went where I knew the path was, because I remembered where the grass looked in summer when we first rented the place. I walked past the neighbor's yard. Their plastic snowman had fallen face down and was frozen into the lawn like a stranded seal. The music tugged me toward the park. I stopped at the edge of the parking lot. It looked like a white sheet stretched too tight. The lake waited beyond the last line of trees. I put my hands in my pockets to warm them. That's when I felt the coin. It wasn't mine. It had that slick old metal feel. Cold, thin. I pulled it out. It was a silver dollar, worn smooth. The date was faint, 1903. The eagle on the back was a blur. I hadn't touched any coins that day. Not like this, not a silver dollar. I stared at it. The music slid around me like wind. I closed my fist. The coin warmed fast, like a hand. I put it back in my pocket quickly, like I had burned myself. Evan! I almost jumped out of my boots. Jessa stood by the swings, wrapped in a big green coat. Her scarf trailed like a flag. Her nose was red. She had a flashlight in one hand and a coil of rope over her shoulder. RJ was with her, breathing hard little clouds. He wore a hat with a pom-pom and no gloves. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Listening," I said. "You can't go out there," she said. "Not at night." "I wasn't going," I said, which wasn't completely true. "I found this." I held up the coin. RJ's eyes got big behind his fogged glasses. "No way," he said. "It's not mine," I said. "It's his," Jessa said. I put the coin back in my pocket fast. "How did you even know I was here?" I asked. "Because you said you heard him," Jessa said. "And because I do this sometimes. I check the park. I make sure the signs are still up. I don't like it when the signs fall." RJ shifted from foot to foot. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "The wind is from the north," Jessa said. "Hear it? It comes through that little gap in the hill by the boathouse. That's when he plays. When it comes down like that, something moved on the ice, far out, a dark shape. It could have been a log poking through. It could have been a patch of open water that looked darker than the rest. It could have been nothing." "I'm going to the dock," I said before my mouth asked me if I was sure. "No," Jessa said. "I'm not going on the ice," I said. "I just want to see if the music is louder there." She made a face like she had to choose between two bad doors. Then she handed me the end of the rope. "Tie this around your waist," she said. "I'll hold it. If you slip, I'll pull." RJ grabbed my sleeve. His hand was very cold, like he had been holding snow. "Don't go far," he said. "I mean it." The dock creaked when I stepped on it. The wood had that frosty shine. The lake was a flat plate. The dark patches looked like bruises. The music was clearer here. It slid along the dock boards like it had been here before, like it remembered where to go. I took 3 slow steps. I stopped at the end of the dock. The sign right next to my shoulder said in big black letters, "Danger Thin Ice. No winter access." The word danger looked bigger than the rest. The wind took my breath, then gave it back. The song changed then. It wasn't slow practice anymore. It picked up. It sounded like a reel. Fast, fun. If you were inside a warm barn with lights and hay bales and pie, you would stomp your feet to this song. If you were on a dark dock with the wind from the north, your feet would think about moving without you. Something dark moved again out near where the ferry post would be. A hat shape? A shoulder? I blinked. Snow got in my eyelashes. I wiped it away. The shape was gone. The song kept going. The rope tugged at my waist. Jess's voice came from behind me, low and urgent. "Come back, please." I took 1 step back. The dock complained. I took another. The song laughed. It really did. It made a little turn at the end, like the way a person might add a show-off note after a joke. My boot heel slipped on a patch of ice on the dock. I flailed, grabbed the post, and the coin in my pocket jumped like a fish. The sound of metal hitting wood rang out, bright, small, sharp. The coin slid, spun, and fell off the edge of the dock. It didn't sink. It skittered across the ice like a bug. The music stopped like somebody cut a string. Don't, Jessa said, not loud, but the word had a lot in it. I bent down. The coin had stopped on a patch of clear ice right next to the dock, like a perfect silver eye looking up at me. My fingers hovered over it. The ice hissed a tiny hiss the way ice does when it knows it has your weight. Under the clear spot was black water. I saw my face dimly. My cheeks were red. My lips were gray. My eyes looked older than they should have. The coin moved. It slid an inch, then another inch, like a finger from the other side was pushing it away from me. I straightened up so fast my neck popped. "Okay," I said to the air. "Okay, you can have it." A laugh slid across the lake. Not a nice laugh. Not mean either. Just knowing. The rope tugged again. My boots wanted to stick to the dock. They didn't. We went home fast. Our boots squeaked. The snow did its dry hiss. The trees didn't move. The music didn't start again. In bed I shook, not because I was cold, because I wasn't. My pocket felt empty and hot. It felt like something important had stood too close to me for a second, and then had walked away on purpose. School was the next day. It was gray and weird. Teachers brought stacks of photocopies to classes like they were shields. People looked at me, then looked away, then looked at me again because I was new. I sat by a window in homeroom and watched the trees. At lunch I sat with Jessa and RJ and two boys with haircuts that looked like helmets. The boys made dumb jokes about the meatloaf. RJ drank chocolate milk and read a news article about ice fishing like it was a chapter of a book. Jessa watched the door every time it opened, like she expected someone to come through with important news. On the way home, we stopped at St. Helena. The cemetery was small and quiet. The headstones were short. The ground was frozen and had little mounds like everyone underneath was breathing slowly. We found the violin stone easily. It was a dark slab with a violin carved at the top. The name Nicholas Gray curved under it, and the dates and the words, "We remember your song." There were pennies on the stone. Some were stuck in a thin layer of ice. Some were shiny new and were just sitting there like little suns. I put one of mine down. I didn't have a silver dollar to offer anymore. "We should give the violin back," RJ said suddenly. "What violin?" Jessa asked. "The one in your attic," he said to me. "It's probably his." "I don't know if it's the landlord's or some other person's," I said. "It might just be a violin." Jessa didn't look at me. She stared at the carved violin on the stone, like she was trying to memorize every curve. "Let's borrow it," she said, the word borrow sounding like a dare. "Let's take it to the lake at sunset and offer to give it back. If he takes it, good. If he doesn't, we put it away and never open the case again." "Sunset," I said. "Isn't that like saying his name 3 times in a mirror?" "It's not night," she said, "and we won't tune it. We won't play it. We'll just show it." "What about the note?" I said. "Don't tune at night." "We won't tune it," she said again. "We won't even touch the pegs." RJ looked interested and scared at the same time. "We should bring a rope," he said, "because ropes make things feel safer even when they don't. And salt. My uncle says salt on ice is bad, but my grandma says you should always bring salt when you're going to see a ghost." "Why salt?" I asked. "She says it makes ghosts thirsty," he said. "That makes no sense," I said. "Okay," he said, "but we're bringing it." We met at my house at 4:30. Sunset is early in January. The sky goes pink and then orange and then weird fast. I carried the violin case. It felt heavier than the first time. I kept having to switch hands. The broken string inside made a tiny dry sound when the case moved. It sounded like a hair brushing paper. Jessa had a big bag of rock salt, the kind you spread on steps. She also had the rope again, and a thermos of something that steamed when she unscrewed the lid. "Cocoa," she said in a voice like she had conjured it with a spell. Real cocoa. Ray J had a flashlight, a camera, and a small paper bag with pennies. "For tolls," he said. We stood at the edge of the park and looked at the lake. The sky was orange and gray. The ice was blue in the places where snow had blown away. A line of small black dots sat near the far shore. Ice shelters. People were fishing. They were safe because the far side had frozen early and thick. Our side had the river mouth. The current made weird spots. The town put up a rope of flags to block the bad line, but sometimes wind knocked it down. We walked to the dock. The sign said the same thing. Danger, no winter access. Fresh boot prints went out onto the first planks and turned back, like a person had come here and changed their mind. The wind was from the north again. It came down the slope like a careful thing testing each step. I hate this, RJ said. Me too, Jessa said. Do you want some cocoa? Yes, he said, and took 2 big gulps without saying thank you because he was too nervous to remember. We put the violin case at the end of the dock and stepped back. We didn't touch it again. We stood a few feet apart. Jessa tied the rope around my waist and around hers and around RJ's. We probably looked like a very small mountain climbing team that had lost its mountain. The first note came from the left like before. It wasn't a song, it was one long sound, like someone checking to see if a string was still a string. It hung in the cold air like a spider line. It made the hair on my arm stand up under my coat. Don't answer, Jessa whispered. Just hold still. We held still. The note came again. A second one followed, lower. The sound was strange here. It changed as it passed the trees, and again where it met the flat lake. It got big, then small, then big again, like it was falling in and out of a hole we couldn't see. The ice in front of us cracked, not a break, a long, slow sound, like a door opening far away. The dock shivered a little. The cracks were older ones moving a tiny bit. They made the most awful sound. It was like a finger on a wet glass. It made my stomach jump. The case latch flipped. We didn't flip it. It just popped open and clicked like a tongue. The lid shifted a hair. No, Jessa said, and put her hand on top of the case. The lid stopped. Her bandana bracelet slid down her wrist. Her skin looked very white against the black case. If you want it, you have to take it, she said, to the air, to the ice, to the story. The song laughed again, then the notes came clear and fast, not like someone far away, like someone close. I looked up. There he was, or there was a shape, tall, long coat, hat. He stood not at the ferry post, but closer. He stood where the ice went dark in a long oval, the kind of spot everyone says, please don't. The bow moved. The light caught the hair. The coat moved like it had water in it. The music didn't match his hands. His hands were slow. The song was quick. It was like watching a video where the sound is out of sync, but it wasn't a video. It was the world. He wasn't alone. Something dark moved under the ice. Long, slow, like a log drifting under a clear river. It moved wrong for water. It curved where it shouldn't. It had edges. It had eyes. The eyes were pale and not like eyes. They were more like the bright parts of the ice, but in the wrong place. RJ grabbed my arm. His nails went right through my coat. We should go, he said. He said it like he was trying to keep his teeth from chattering. Maybe he was. Maybe I was. The fiddler stopped. The bow lifted. It hung in the air. One more note slid off it like a drip of water. The lid of the case tugged under Jessa's hand, gentle like a dog testing a leash. Back away, she said through her teeth. Keep your hands off the case. Back away. Slow. We backed away. One step. Another. The rope between us went slack, then tight, then slack again. The dock boards creaked. The ice made its little fizzing sound near the shore. The case lid lifted on its own. The violin sat inside like a sleeping thing someone had whispered to. It looked warmer than everything else around it. The broken string twitched. The fiddler put his head to the side like a person listening to a question. I couldn't see his face. The hat made a shadow. The coat collar was high, but I felt like he was looking right at my mouth, not at me, at the part of me that talked. Don't, Jessa whispered sharply. Don't say anything. My tongue felt funny, like I had eaten a whole orange and left a string of peel stuck in there. I wanted to say hello, or stop, or take it, or leave us alone, or why us, or anything. The words lined up and waited. The broken string tightened by itself. The peg didn't move. The string just tightened. The note it would make if it could make one got higher in my head. It was like the string was inside my skull, and someone was winding it. The dark thing under the ice moved again, closer to the dock, right under the clear spot where the coin had been. It brushed the underside of the ice. The ice made that high squeal again. I tasted metal. Go, Jessa said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The word had weight. We went. We backed down the dock, pulling the rope, pulling each other. The case sat at the end, like a little black mouth. The violin looked like a tongue. The broken string quivered like a hair in front of a candle. The last board of the dock had a little nail sticking up. RJ's heel caught it. He stumbled. The rope jerked. The case tipped. The violin slid half an inch. It made a sound, not a note, a scrape, a tiny self-playing sound. It was enough. The fiddler put the bow to his strings and flung out a line of music so fast my eyes watered. It sounded like ice laughing. It sounded like the part of a party where everyone forgets they are tired. It sounded like something saying now. The rope went tight. My waist bent. For a second, I thought the dock was moving. Then I realized the rope wasn't pulling us. It was pulling the case. Let go. Jessa yanked at the knot around her waist. The rope burned my hands even through my gloves. I fumbled the knot. It was tight. The case scraped. The violin shifted. The broken string snapped back against the wood with a little slap. The sound was small, but it went right into my teeth. I can't, RJ said because his fingers were too cold. I got my knot loose. The rope fell off my coat. Jessa got hers. She grabbed RJ's with both hands and pulled so hard she made a small sound, then hissed through her teeth. The knot came free. The rope went slack. The case stopped moving. I expected the fiddler to keep playing. He didn't. He lowered the bow. He stood there. The wind blew his coat just a little like it was breathing. His hat tilted. Something knocked under the ice, exactly once. A single thump, not near the ferry post. Not out there, right under the dock. It felt like a fist punching the bottom of the lake. We ran. We ran off the dock, across the snow, through the little line of trees, down the park path. We didn't stop until we were at the street sign. My breath burned. My ears rang. My legs shook. My hands hummed like I had been holding a small engine. We didn't speak on the way to my house. We all knew if we did, we might say the wrong thing. And I didn't want any wrong things floating around in the cold, waiting to get bigger. In the warm kitchen, Mom looked up from the table and raised her eyebrows. "You three look like you saw a moose," she said. "Do we have any duct tape?" I asked. She blinked. "In the drawer with the pens." "Why?" "No reason," I said. "We taped the violin case shut in 6 places. Then we put it in the trunk of Mom's car. Then we put a blanket over it. Then we shut the car like we were shutting a mouth." J went home. Jessa went home. I went upstairs and sat on my bed. I could still feel the rope on my waist. I could still feel the coin in my pocket, even though it wasn't there. I could still hear that one thump under the dock. I could still see the slow thing under the ice turning toward where I had stood. At midnight, my phone buzzed on my nightstand. I didn't touch it. It buzzed again, and again. I picked it up. There was no number, just a blank screen, and a small gray box that said unknown. I swiped. The call connected. I didn't say hello. I didn't breathe. Music came through the earpiece. Not the outdoor sound. Not the wind's version. It was clear, like the player was in my room. It was slow, not fast. It was the sound of someone tuning a string, to match another string in the dark. There was a tiny scrape, then a small, perfect note. Evan, a voice said. A man's voice, quiet, clean. It sounded like a story being read to a little kid in a language they almost know. Bring what you borrowed. I didn't borrow anything, I whispered. I shouldn't have whispered. I shouldn't have said anything. The words snuck out anyway. I felt them leave my mouth like four little birds that didn't know how to come back. Bring what you borrowed, the voice repeated, or play in its place. The call ended. My phone screen reflected my face. I looked very pale. My eyes looked too big. I put the phone on the floor and shoved it under my bed with my foot like it was a bug. I didn't sleep for a long time. In the morning, Mom asked if I was sick. I said no. I ate toast that tasted like nothing. My hand shook when I buttered it. Mom said something about a meeting and paperwork and a snow day Friday, and I nodded too fast. I walked to school with Jessa and RJ. We didn't talk about the doc. We didn't talk about the case. We talked about nothing on purpose. At lunch, Jessa pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket. This was in the mail this morning, she said. No stamp. Someone put it inside the screen door. It was addressed to our house, but there's no name. She unfolded it. The paper was thick. The ink was bluish and thin. The handwriting was small and straight. It said, "The debt is one song or one soul." That's fake, RJ said right away. Some high schooler did that. That's what this is, a prank. No high schooler writes like that, Jessa said. No one writes like that. I touched the paper. It was cold, like it had been outside longer than it had. How would he even know where you live? I asked. He doesn't, she said, but the thing under the ice might. That afternoon, a group of kids crowded around the bulletin board outside the office. There was a new flyer pinned to the cork. The word missing was at the top in big black letters. The picture was the same girl I'd seen on Mom's morning news. Lena, the braces, the blue shirt. The line under the picture said 5'4", brown hair, last seen wearing green coat and black boots. Call if you know anything. Jessa stared at the picture a long time. Then she reached up and straightened the top right corner of the paper, like that would help. What if? RJ started, then he stopped, then he started again, because he couldn't help it. What if she followed the music, he said. What if she didn't live here? What if she didn't know? Don't, Jessa said, but in a soft voice, like she knew it might be true. I had a thought then that felt like a little knife. It didn't hurt right away, it just pressed. The thought was this: what if the voice on my phone wasn't for me? What if it was for anyone? What if it called every kid who could hear a tune and had an attic? That night, the wind came from the east. No music. The lake sounded like a million small feet on a gym floor. The ice shifted and sighed. We made it through one night without anything weird. I slept for 5 whole hours. It felt like being given water. Then Friday came. Snow day. No school. The town looked like a toy town. The library was closed. The clinic was open but slow. Mom made pancakes. I ate 3 and felt almost normal. At 11, there was a knock on the door. I opened it. Nobody stood there. There was a violin string on the doormat. It was red. It was tied in a loop. I picked it up very carefully with 2 fingers. It was warm. It felt like hair. It felt like something that had been alive. There was a small note under it. The note said, "Tune." I put the string on the kitchen table. I stood and stared at it like staring could make it smaller. Mom came in with a mug and frowned. "What's that?" "A joke," I said. "Ha," she said. "Well, don't leave it there. It looks like a worm." I took the string and the note to the garage. I opened Mom's car. I lifted the corner of the blanket. The tape was still tight. The case looked the same. I put the red string on top of the blanket. I shut the trunk. At noon, the wind shifted. It came down the hill clean from the north. You could hear it before it hit the house. It made the small tree by the mailbox bow in a neat little bow. I knew in my stomach the way you know when a person you like is looking at you. I knew there would be music at sunset. At 4, The sky turned that weird blue-white color, like you were watching the inside of a refrigerator door. I texted Jessa and RJ. Doc? They texted back. Yes. I texted the second thing I had been trying not to ask all day. Bring the case? Jessa texted. Yes. RJ texted yes. There was a pause. Then Jessa texted, and the string. I told Mom we were going to the park to take pictures of the sunset. She said, wear your hat. I put on two. I put the string in my coat pocket next to the place where the coin had been. The pocket knew the feeling now. It felt full and wrong. The dock creaked the same way it had before. The ice lay there like a kept promise. The line of fishing shelters on the far side looked like small black teeth. The music started slow this time. Then it rose. Then it rose again. It didn't feel like it was asking. It felt like it was answering something I hadn't said yet. We put the case at the end like last time. We stepped back. The rope was around our waists. Then not, because Jessa said it was worse to be tied to something that might get dragged. We had the salt in a bag. We had the pennies in a paper sack. RJ held them like a person holds a sick bird. The case latch clicked open by itself. It wasn't a surprise this time. It still made my heart jump. The lid lifted. The broken string curled. I took the red string out of my pocket. It didn't want to be held. It tried to squirm. I held it anyway. I didn't tune anything. I didn't touch the pegs. I laid the string across the violin, gentle, like a ribbon on a box. The wind hit us. It smelled like old iron water. The fiddler stood closer than the night before. His coat moved in small waves. His bow made a shimmer in the air that looked like a cobweb in a flashlight. I couldn't see his face. I knew he had one. I knew I didn't want to. Here, I said, because I couldn't help it. I hated my voice. It sounded like it was coming from the wrong mouth. Here, take it. I stepped forward and pushed the case a little toward the end of the dock with the side of my boot. The case made a small scritching sound. It looked like it wanted to slide off into the lake. The fiddler stopped playing. He lifted his bow. In the quiet we heard it, a soft knock under the ice. Then another. 1, 2. Pause. 1. It was the slowest, politest sound in the world. Jessa grabbed my arm, hard. Don't move, she said. Don't play. Don't say anything else. The fiddler put the bow to the strings again. He drew it across. The sound was different, lower. It sounded like a deep breath through teeth. The broken string on the violin in the case tightened on its own. It lay across the red string I had put there like a hand crossing another hand. The red string twitched. It looked like it wanted to knot itself without fingers. My phone rang in my pocket. I jumped. The screen said unknown. I almost answered. I didn't. It went to voicemail. The music didn't stop. The message machine in my head clicked on. Bring what you borrowed, or play in its place. I picked up the red string with 2 fingers. It was warm again, almost hot. I held it over the violin. It made the hair on the back of my hand stand up. Don't, Jessa said. Please. I looked at her. Her face was pale and serious. She had a smear of salt on her cheek like a chalk mark. RJ's teeth were clenched like he was holding something in. The fiddler made 2 fast notes that sounded like a question and an answer. I dropped the string. It landed perfectly in the grooves on the tailpiece, like it had been there before. It settled. It hummed. It didn't need tuning. It was already tuned. The case hummed with it. The dock hummed. My chest hummed. The lake hummed. The whole town hummed. The fiddler lifted his bow as if in thanks. The dark thing under the ice slid so close to the dock I could have touched it with a broom. My fingers curled into fists. The thing stopped. Its pale knot eyes faced up. It blinked. I swear it blinked. The fiddler took a step toward the dock. The ice didn't crack under his boot. It didn't sink. It didn't do anything. It just accepted. He took one more step. He stopped at the end of the dock like he was being polite. He looked at the case. He tilted his head. He lifted his free hand. His glove was wet. Water dripped from the cuff. The drops hit the ice, and became little pearls that rolled away and didn't melt. He held out his hand to me, palm up, like a person asking for the check at a restaurant. Payment, he said, in my ear, in my head, in the wind. The word was soft. It didn't make steam. I don't have the coin, I said, because I couldn't help it. I dropped it. He tilted his head to the other side. He looked at my coat. He looked at the pocket where the coin had been. He took his hand back. He reached into the air like there was a pocket there and pulled out my house key. It sat on his glove, small and dull. The keychain dangled. It had the clinic's name on it. I had lost the key the day we moved in. I thought it fell in the snow. I didn't tell Mom because I didn't want her to say you're irresponsible on our first day in Graybridge. The fiddler held it out to me. Evan, he said, and my name sounded like a string on a cold morning. Play. The red string glowed. The broken string hummed. The bow in his other hand lifted like a test. I reached toward the key. Under the ice, something opened an eye, and the whole dock dropped half an inch like the lake had taken a breath in. The dock dropped, and my stomach went with it. The wood thumped. The rope around my waist went tight like a seatbelt. I almost fell to my knees. The fiddler held out my key and watched me like he had all winter to wait. His glove dripped. The drops froze into tiny pearls and rolled away. Under the ice, that pale eye opened. It wasn't really an eye. It was like a round patch of brighter ice in the wrong place. It blinked once. The blinking was slow, the slowest blink I have ever seen. Payment, the voice said again. It wasn't loud. It didn't come from his mouth. It was just there in the air, like your name at school assembly when you almost dozed off, and suddenly everyone is looking at you. The red string shivered on the violin in the open case. The broken string hummed. It lay across the red one, like two crossed fingers you make for luck. What happens if you don't pay? RJ asked. He meant to whisper. He didn't. His voice bounced off the frozen boards and sounded too big. The fiddler turned his head a little. He didn't have to look at RJ. He didn't have to say anything. We all knew what he meant when he said nothing. One song, I said. Or one. I couldn't say the other word. The cold took it. It stuck to my tongue like a piece of ice. Jessa squeezed my arm so hard I felt the bones. Don't say it, she hissed. Don't give it the shape. The dock creaked. The ice made that long door opening sound out near the dark oval. It wasn't breaking. It was stretching. The fiddler held the key a little higher. The bow in his other hand pointed down. He could have brought it up in a second. I knew what the sound would be if he did. It would be fast. It would be the sound your legs make before your brain can tell them no. I don't have your coin, I said. I dropped it. I wanted to bite the words back. They came out anyway. They made little clouds in front of my mouth and then went away. He tilted his head the other way. He looked at the pocket where the coin had been. He looked at the place on the dock where it had skittered. He looked at the black water under the clear patch of ice. Then he raised his chin like he was listening for something far away. One note left his bow. It slid across the air like a knife through paper. It landed on the red string in the case. The red string hummed back without a hand. The broken string hummed after it like a shadow. My teeth buzzed. Don't play, Jessa said. Don't touch the pegs. He listens when you tune. I know, I said. My mouth was dry. My palms were wet inside my gloves. It didn't make sense. Rajay held up the paper bag of pennies. We could try the toll, he whispered. We could pay. He shook the bag so the coins clinked like a tiny bell. The sound went out a little way, and then fell, like a moth at a porch light. The fiddler didn't look at the bag. He kept looking at my hands. I understood then. The note in the attic had been right. It wasn't about the wood or the strings. It was about hands. It was about tuning. It was about turning something until it matched. He didn't want the instrument. He wanted the turning. He wanted my fingers on a peg in the night. Back away, Jessa said again. We took one small step at the same time. The rope between us went slack, then tight, then slack, The dock groaned the way a house does when someone steps into the hallway at 1 a.m. Another knock came from under the ice. Then a second, right after it. 1, 2. Pause. 1. Like the lake was learning how to knock on a door. The fiddler lowered the bow. He held the key out again. He leaned forward a little, like a person at a counter who doesn't want to shout. He could have stepped onto the dock. He didn't. The politeness made it worse. Evan, he said. The way he said my name made my chest feel hollow. Play. He didn't say please. He didn't have to. I looked at my hands. They didn't feel like mine. They felt light. They wanted to reach into the case. They wanted to pick up the bow. That was scary. That was the scariest part. Not the long thing under the ice. Not the key in his glove. Not the dock drooping. It was that my own hands wanted to move on their own. I tightened them into fists. My gloves creaked. The leather cracked a little where it was old. We don't owe you, I said. I don't know why I said it. It sounded brave in my head. It sounded small out loud. We didn't borrow anything. He tilted his head at the case. The lid moved a hair like it was breathing. The red string shone like a vein. That was in my house, I said. Like that changed anything. It listens, he said. You opened it. His voice had no blame in it. That almost made it worse. He wasn't angry. He was sure. Bring what you borrowed, or play in its place. RJ took a penny from the bag. He tossed it toward the ice. It hit the board, bounced, and slid off. It skittered across the clear patch like the silver dollar had. The sound it made was tiny and bright. Ting, ting. The coin stopped. It didn't sink. It lay there like a shiny eye. 3 more notes left the bow. The lake answered with a crack. The dock dipped and came up again. Enough, Jessa snapped. She grabbed the bag from RJ, reached into her salt sack, and flung a handful of rock salt across the end of the dock. The crystals hit the wood like small stars. Some bounced onto the ice and skittered. Some stuck and began to melt tiny holes. The fiddler took 1 step back. He didn't flinch. He just moved like someone moving away from a hot stove. The dark thing under the ice pulled back a little too. It didn't like the salt. It didn't run. It didn't have to. Salt, RJ said like it was a new religion. More. We threw another handful. The salt hissed where it hit wet wood. The ice made that long door sound again. The fiddler's coat fluttered once as if he had turned quickly in a wind, but he hadn't. He was still. He lowered the key until it was level with the case. Then he set it on the dock rail. He pushed it toward me with 1 finger. It slid along the frost and stopped at the toe of my boot. Payment, he said again. Play. My hand moved without me. It reached down. It picked up the key. It was cold. It was comforting. It felt like home in a way. It was my home key. I looked at the metal post at the end of the dock. It had a cap on it. It had frozen solid. It rang a little when the wind hit it the right way. I thought of something dumb. It was so dumb it made my cheeks burn, but it wouldn't leave my head. 1 song, I thought. He didn't say which song. He didn't say which instrument. He didn't say it had to be good. Evan, Jessa said in a warning voice. She knows me. She knows when I get a dumb idea. I took the key and tapped it gently against the cap. The sound was small. Ting. I tapped again. Ting. I changed the spot. Lower. Ting. Higher. Ting. The cap had 3 notes in it if you hit 3 parts. The fiddler didn't move. I tapped out a tune. I couldn't help it. It was the simplest one. The one every kid learns when they learn anything. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I know that's lame. It's the lamest. But it was in my hands. My hands know it. I don't know any other song on metal. I tapped it soft and neat. Ting, ting, ti-ting, ting. I didn't hurry. I counted inside my head. The wind stopped for a heartbeat. The lake listened. I know how that sounds. But it did. The air got round and blank, like a room with no furniture. Halfway through, the fiddler raised the bow. I almost dropped the key. He didn't play. He held it there. He let me finish. I tapped the last note. It sounded tiny and brave. The key hurt my fingers. The cold had gone into it. It had gone into me. The fiddler lowered the bow. He bent his head. It wasn't a bow like at a theater. It was smaller. It was a nod like when two men pass each other at the gas station and don't want to make a thing out of it. The red string in the case stopped glowing. It lay there like string again. The dark shape under the ice turned and slid away. It didn't go fast. It just left, like a log in a river that finally found the current it wanted. The key got warm in my hand, not hot, just warm, like someone had been holding it for a long time and had handed it back to me on purpose. Payment, the fiddler said, softer. Paid. He backed away one slow step at a time. He stopped at the dark oval and put the bow under his chin. He didn't play. He just held it there. He looked at me. He didn't have eyes, not ones I could see, but I knew where he was looking. I knew what he was measuring. Your voice, he said, just for me. No. My throat closed. That was the door I hadn't meant to open. It was too late. I had played. Not the violin, but I had played. I had given him a way to find me in the winter. He would know the shape of my sound now. Go, Jessa whispered. She pushed my shoulder. Go now. We backed off the dock. We didn't turn our backs. We moved slow. We didn't run. We didn't make a sound. We got to the trees, and then we let out our breath all at once like we had been holding it under water. We looked back. The case was still open. The violin looked normal. The red string lay flat. The broken string, the real one, lay across it. The fiddler stood where he had been standing. His coat moved like it knew the lake better than any of us. Do we take it? RJ asked. He meant the violin. Not tonight, Jessa said. The word tonight felt important. We close it. We tape it again. We put it away. We don't open it unless we do it in daylight with 6 people and a giant bucket of salt. We did as she said. We closed the lid. The latch clicked. It stayed. We carried the case together like it was a heavy cat you didn't want to wake up. We put it in Mom's car and taped it with a whole roll of duct tape. We put the blanket over it. We hid the key in my pocket where it belonged. My jeans felt lighter. My ribs felt heavier. You okay? Mom asked when we came in. She was cutting carrots. The knife made a steady cluck on the board. The normal sound made me dizzy for a second. Fine, I said. I washed my hands for a long time. The water ran hot, and then too hot. My fingers turned pink. I didn't stop. That night, the wind came from the south. No music. The lake made winter noises. My phone didn't buzz. I slept like someone had poured sleep into me from a jug. In the morning, we went to St. Helena. We brought pennies. We brought flowers. Not many flowers grow in January. The grocery store had sad bundles wrapped in plastic. We bought the ones with the smallest price tags because we were paying for tape and salt now too. We stood by the violin stone. It was half covered in snow. The pennies were stuck there, under a thin glaze like bugs in amber. We paid, I said under my breath. We paid a song. Jessa set a penny on the flat top. It slid a little and stopped. I don't think he keeps books, she said. I think he keeps names. RJ pressed a penny down with his thumb. Did you guys feel it? When you played, he asked me, like he was trying to tug your fingers. Yes, I said. Me too, he said. He wiggled his ink-stained fingers. They looked normal. They didn't feel normal. We walked to the back where the little hill falls away to the feed store's parking lot. There was a line of trees. Someone had tied bright ribbons to one of them. The ribbons snapped in the wind. The tags on them said Lena in big letters and please come home and prayers. There were candles. They had gone out and frozen in place with little puddles of wax around the wicks. We didn't say anything. We didn't have anything good to say. We stood there like 3 small sticks in the snow and let the wind do the talking. Days passed, then a week. The wind changed a lot. Sometimes it blew down the hill in a rush that rattled trash can lids and made the whole town smell like the river. Sometimes it blew sideways so hard your hat tried to leave your head. Sometimes it came from the north, and we heard a thin high note from the lake, far out, near the dark oval. We didn't go on those nights. We didn't go anywhere. We stayed inside and played cards and watched shows about people cooking food we would never taste. School felt normal again. That happens. Your brain just picks up normal and puts it back down and says, okay, this is normal again, even if the world hasn't agreed yet. I learned where the bathrooms were. I learned which teacher said pop quiz like a joke and then meant it anyway. I learned there are 3 vending machines in the gym, but only one that takes nickels. I learned what time the town plow came down Birch Street by ear. That was my new trick. And every night, when I turned out my light, I pressed my hand to my pocket, even if there wasn't anything in it, and felt for the shape of a coin that wasn't there. My fingers tingled where the key had warmed me. On a Sunday, the ice fishing tents on the far side made a neat line of dots. People were out with their thermoses and their tiny chairs. Mr. Jensen from the hardware store had a big orange radio, and he was playing music that made the tents look like a parade. Mom and I watched from the park. We stayed on the path. We did not step 1 inch onto the ice. Not even when a yellow lab came to say hello with his whole rear end wagging, and his owner laughed and said he just loves kids. We saw a girl in a green coat near the bait shop. My heart tried to climb up my throat. Lena, I said to no one. The girl turned. She was not Lena. Different eyes, different mouth. She smiled anyway. She had braces. She waved. She went on. Don't stare, Mom said. You'll give yourself a headache. That night, the wind came from the north again. The note slid along the treetops like it had learned our streets. It felt like it took its time around our corner. Jessa texted, hear it? I texted, yes. RJ texted, earplugs. Jessa texted, he doesn't care about ears. I texted, stay inside. We stayed inside. I put the key in a bowl on my dresser. I put the bowl on a book. I put the book on top of the violin note from the attic. I was building a tower out of little things I could control. At midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown. I didn't answer. It buzzed again. I didn't answer. It buzzed a 3rd time. I picked it up and turned it off. In the silence after you turn off a phone, your room feels weird. The air hum goes away. You can hear your own breath. You can hear the house. The house made a tiny tick-tick from the baseboard heater. The wind made a moan in the chimney. The pine next to my window rubbed its arms together. A knock came from downstairs. It was soft. It was polite. It was 1, 2. Pause. 1. I didn't move. Mom did. I heard the couch spring shift. I heard her bare feet on the kitchen tile. I heard the chain on the front door slide. I heard the door open exactly 1 inch and then shut. In the morning, Mom said, we're getting a new lock. That deadbolt sticks. Okay, I said. We didn't talk about the small wet circle on the doormat that had frozen into a perfect ring. We didn't talk about the red string tied in a neat bow on the porch railing. We didn't touch it. We didn't even look at it for very long. Monday, the librarian unlocked the back room for us again. No snacks, she said, and no old ghost men in muddy boots. Yes, ma'am, we said like a little choir. RJ turned on the microfilm machine. He fed in a long gray roll like a ribbon of shadow. He spun it. He stopped. People lived and died on that screen. Dances were held. Crops did well. Crops did bad. Winter came. Winter came again. Someone wrote about a cold snap with the word cruel in the sentence. Someone wrote about a storm with the word blunt. I liked that. Jessa found a small article. Ferrum Bridge frozen. The old name of the town. Another. Young man rescued by brother, 1903. We knew that one. There were others. 1917-31, 1955, 1974, 1999. Always after a north wind. Always near the old post. Always one goes under. Not always one comes back. Why a song? I asked. Why not money? Why not pennies? Why a song? Because his job was to take people across, Jessa said. That's what a ferryman does. He takes you across safely. He got paid with coins. Then the river froze him and his brother under, and nobody paid the last time. Maybe the song is what he charges now instead. Or maybe he thinks a song is the same as a coin. Or maybe he doesn't think anything at all, and we are the ones who think it for him. That made my head hurt, RJ said. The librarian poked her head in. It will, she said. You three should go get hot chocolate. You look like paper. On Friday, the wind turned warm and wet. It smelled like old leaves. The ice on the sidewalks got a skin of water that made it slippery in a whole new way. The lake went gray. The crack sounds were less sharp. They were deeper, like whales talking in a movie. We went to the park after dinner. We stood on the path. We didn't go on the dock. We didn't bring the case. The string stayed in the trunk. The tape held. The blanket covered it. I checked the tape every morning like it was a pet. The fiddler stood far out where the ice was still white. He wasn't playing. He just stood there like a post in a field after the hay has been cut. He looked smaller and more lonely than he had the first night. The long dark shape was not near him. It was deeper. It had gone to where the ice still held its breath. Spring will break him, Jessa said softly. I don't think spring breaks things like that, RJ said. I didn't say anything. I was thinking about my key on my dresser. I was thinking about my fingers on the metal cap. I was thinking about my name when he said it. I felt like someone had written it on my forehead in invisible ink, and it was going to show up in the cold. On the very last, very cold night of February, we tried something new. It was Jessa's idea. We went to St. Helena. We brought the violin case. We brought the salt. We brought a shovel. We dug a small trench in the snow around the violin stone and poured salt in a circle. We set the case in front of the stone with the violin carved on it. We lit 2 candles and put them in jars so the wind wouldn't eat them in one bite. We're giving it back, she said, like a person at a window speaking to a clerk. We're giving it to Nicholas, not to what's under the ice, not to the wind, to him. We opened the case. We didn't touch the pegs. We didn't touch the bow. We laid the red string loose across the bridge, like a ribbon on a cake. RJ poured a handful of pennies onto the stone. They made a little sound like rain that has been told to be quiet. The wind moved. The candles trembled inside their jars and then stayed put. A note slid through the trees from the lake. It was the same note as always, thin, high, the kind of note that wants to put your hand on a doorknob. We didn't move. The wind shifted again. It came from the south. Someone laughed far down the road, and a dog barked twice, and then stopped because its person told it to. The case sat there. The red string didn't glow. It just lay there the way string lies. It didn't hum. The broken string lay across it like a hair in a book. I think he wants you to put your hands on it, RJ said. He was right. I could feel the pull in my fingers. I squeezed them into a fist. They tingled like they had fallen asleep. Not tonight, I said. Not here. We closed the case. The latch clicked. We carried it back to the car. We put it in the trunk. We shut the trunk. We turned and looked one more time at the violin carved on the headstone. The carving was simple. The lines were clean. The man who had done it had known violins. He had known what a curve means. Please, Jessa said to the stone, let him go. Let the lake have your job. Let the road have your job. Let us walk across a bridge with our feet and not owe anyone anything. The wind thought about it and didn't answer. In March, the river opened a little near the culvert. The ice got soft around the edges. It went from white to gray to rotten looking. The kids who know ice went out with sticks and poked it and shook their heads. The kids who don't know ice stayed home and played video games because their parents told them this is not the week to test me. One night, the wind blew and blew. It made trash cans dance. It pushed a neighbor's grill 3 feet and then set it down like a rude friend. It roared down the hill and got stuck in the pines by my window. The house moaned. The picture on the wall in the hall rattled. Mom put a folded napkin behind it and said, "There." At 2 a.m., I woke up because my room felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your brain put its hand to its ear. I sat up, I listened. No wind, no heater click, no fridge hum, silence. Then from downstairs, the smallest sound, a tiny plastic click like the sound a latch makes when somebody old and patient pops it open. The tape. I went down the stairs very slowly. I skipped the step that creaks because I am not an idiot. I stood in the dark kitchen and let my eyes adjust. The door to the garage glowed a little around the edges because there is a small window in it, and the streetlight was bouncing off the snow. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear nothing. You can't hear a blanket. You can't hear a piece of tape. I stood like that for a long time. My breathing made the glass fog. I wiped it with my sleeve. The sleeve made a squeak. I winced. I went back to bed and lay down and didn't sleep. In the morning, I got up early and went straight to the garage. My heart thudded. My mouth tasted like old pennies. I opened the trunk. The case was there. The tape was there. It was smooth and flat. It didn't look like it had moved. The blanket looked the same. I put my hand on the tape. It felt different. It felt warm in one spot, near the latch. I pressed. The sticky gave a little like it had been peeled and put back down. I didn't tell Jessa. I didn't tell RJ. I told myself I had imagined it. I didn't believe me. On the first day of real spring, when the sidewalks were rivers and the town dogs were muddy and everyone had their coat unzipped like a badge of honor, we heard a sound from the lake that wasn't a fiddle and wasn't a crack. It was a long roar like a stadium crowd. The ice broke. It broke from the middle out. It broke all at once, and then in slow motion, the whole town stopped whatever it was doing and listened to the lake let go. We went down to the park and stood at the fence with everyone else. The kids with sticks threw them in. The sticks went under and then popped up again in places you didn't expect. The old ferry post leaned a little more than it had leaned in February. It looked tired. By the bait shop, a woman in a green coat hugged a girl with braces until the girl's feet left the ground. People clapped. Someone honked a car horn. Someone else told them not to honk the car horn, and they honked it again anyway, because when you worry for a long time and then you get to stop worrying, your hands do dumb things. "Lena," Jessa whispered, "we didn't go closer. The people who love you get to go close. The rest of us get to clap and then get out of the way." We listened to the lake sigh. We smelled mud. We watched a plastic chair float away from the far shore like it had decided to go on a trip and hadn't told anyone. At home, I took the violin case out of the trunk. I carried it into the kitchen. I set it on the table. I cut the tape with my mom's heavy scissors. The scissor blades made a solid sounds like biting into an apple. "Are you sure?" Mom asked. She didn't know what I was about to do. She knew anyway. Moms do. "No," I said. I opened the case. The green velvet looked the same. The violin sat there. The red string lay across the bridge. The broken string lay over it. The bow was in its little clip. The rosin was still a T-block in the little compartment. There was a new note. It was folded in half. The paper was thin and old and dry. It was tucked right where the rosin had been, like a bookmark. The writing was tiny and neat. It looked like the old note in the attic. It said, "Day is safe. Night is a bridge. Do not play on a bridge." I stared at the words. My head felt slow. The words felt like a math problem with too many steps. Day safe. Night a bridge. Don't play on a bridge. Jessa and RJ came over. We sat at the table and stared at the note and didn't touch the violin. Mom made tea and pretended not to watch us over the rim of her mug. "What does it mean?" RJ said. "Night is a bridge?" "Maybe it means the night is how he crosses," Jessa said. "Like water used to be. Night is the river now. Songs are the toll. Then day is a road, I said. His road is closed. He can't cross. That's why we didn't hear him on warm mornings. That's why it feels dumb to be scared in the afternoon. I picked up the key from the bowl on my dresser. I brought it back. I set it on the table next to the note. It warmed my palm. There was pencil writing on the back of the note, smaller, crowded. We hadn't seen it at first. I turned the paper in the light. The words showed up like a secret map when a teacher holds it near the overhead projector. It said, "If you must answer, answer wrong. If you must play, play the thing that is not yours. If you must pay, pay together." That sounds like my grandma, Jessa said. She smiled for the first time in 2 days. What's the thing that is not yours? RJ asked. He was already making lists in his head. I could see it. The dock, I said. The fence, the key, the trash can, the railing, the bell at St. Helena, the gate at the old ferry road, the pipe under the boathouse, anything that is not mine, anything that belongs to all of us. Pay together, Jessa said, not alone. We made a plan, a simple one. We wrote it down. We kept it small. We told 3 people, not 9, not the whole town. 3 is enough to start a song. At the next north wind, we went to the park at sunset. We did not bring the violin. We did not bring the bow. We did not bring the red string. We brought this, a bag of pennies, a sack of rock salt, 2 metal spoons, the big bell from the little chapel at St. Helena. Father Rick said yes, and 10 kids. We tied the bell to the dock rail with a big rope. We put pennies in a tin can and taped the lid down and tied that to another rope. We took turns hitting the bell with spoons, gently, carefully, not a rhythm, not a beat, no tune, nothing you could hum, just noise, not answers. The fiddler came. He stood on the dark oval like always. He lifted the bow. He put it down. We weren't playing a song. We were playing wrong. He waited. We waited. He lowered the bow and nodded one small time, and then he went farther out where the ice hadn't broken yet. He stood there like a fence post until the light was gone, and there were only the small lights of houses and the big dark of the lake. We walked home in a group. The kids were loud when we got back to the street. They always are after they're scared. They have to let the extra sound out of their bodies. At midnight, my phone buzzed one time and then stopped. It didn't try again. I stared at it for a long time until the screen went dark and all I could see was my face. Spring came. The ice was gone. The dock looked small and dumb without the lake under it, holding its voice. The old ferry post leaned and then fell on a windy day when we weren't there. It lay in the water with a wet thump and drifted toward the reeds. A crane watched it go with its long neck like a question mark. Mom said we could stay in Graybridge or we could move in June. Her job could go either way. The clinic likes her. They like that she stays late and makes little cards with colored pens to explain medicine to people who are scared. She asked me what I wanted. I looked at the lake and at the town and at my hands. I looked at the key in my pocket. It was mine now. It had been under someone else's glove for a minute. That was true. It was mine again. That was also true. I want to stay, I said. My voice didn't wobble, at least until next winter. I didn't say why. I didn't have to. We put the violin case in the attic. We put it under the quilt. We put the note on top. We left the red string inside. We didn't tape it. We didn't need to. Day is safe. We closed the attic door and pulled the ladder up and shut it all with that big ceiling click that sounds like a secret. Summer in Graybridge is loud. Lawnmowers, boats, music from the ice cream truck that sounds a little wobbly on hills. People shout from one yard to another and wave with both arms. You forget for a little. You don't mean to. Your body just does. We swam in the lake in July. We swam near the beach where the lifeguard sits in a red chair and blows a whistle at boys who splash on purpose. We swam on the shallow side of the old ferry road. We didn't swim in the middle. We know where the current goes. We felt it on our ankles. We stayed away. Once, a dark, long shape slid under us, out by the buoys. I froze. Jessa grabbed my arm. It was nothing. It was a log. It was a long fish. It was a shadow. It was a boat's reflection. We told each other those things until our hearts believed us. In August, we watched a storm come across the lake. It picked up white caps and shook them and tossed them at the shore. It bent the pines and licked at the sand with fingers. The power went out on our street, and we lit candles and told stories, and it felt like camping. In September, the geese left. In October, the first frost came at night and made the grass look silver. In November, the river got that slow, sleepy face. In December, the lake turned white at the edges, like someone had put a sheet around it. You know what comes next. One night in January, I woke up because my room felt cold and friendly, the way it feels when the radiator has gone quiet and the house has decided to breathe softer. I sat up. I listened. The wind was from the north. A thin, high note slid down Birch Street like a ribbon. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was not a brave smile. It was the smile you make when you know something will happen, and you know you can do something about it, and you know you will be scared anyway. I sent 2 texts. Jessa answered with a thumbs up. RJ answered with a dinosaur. I took the key from the bowl. It was cold. It warmed in my hand. I went to the closet. I took down the 2 metal spoons we keep there now. I put them in my pocket. I grabbed the rope. I grabbed the bell. I grabbed the bag with the tape and the matches and the jar. I put on my coat. At the door, there was a new note. It had been slid under and caught on the mat. The paper was thin and dry. The writing was tiny and neat. I didn't pick it up. I didn't have to. I bent and read it upside down. It said, "Winter keeps a list." I opened the door. The cold hit me in the face like a hello. The trees stood black and tall. The lake looked like a sleeping thing. The music came through the pines. The wind brought it to me. My chest felt like it had a little drum in it. Behind me, in the kitchen, a single small sound, a plastic click, the kind tape makes. I didn't turn around. I stepped outside. I closed the door gently. I walked toward the dock. I held the bell and the spoons and the rope. I held the key. I held my voice in my mouth like a coin. I did not know what I would have to play. I knew I wouldn't play it alone. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you company tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more myths, legends, and gentle hauntings. Sleep well, and may the trails you choose lead you safely home.